Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today, we'll venture into the world of unused ideas. Those fleeting thoughts that once formed in the mind of J.K. Rowling, but for one reason or another, never made it into the Harry Potter books. Just imagine drafts where alternate versions of our beloved story live in the margins, plots that could have turned the familiar tale completely upside down. So let's take a peek behind the curtain of the magical world. Enjoy watching. Number 1, Hermione's father, Harry's unexpected savior, Hermione Granger, the genius, the heart of the trio, the muggle-born witch. But what do we actually know about her parents? Very little, except that they're both dentists. Yet, in one of the early drafts of Philosopher's Stone, Rowling planned for Mr. Granger to be a minor hero. According to that version, the Potters and Grangers were neighbours. It was Hermione's father who was supposed to find baby Harry in the ruins of the destroyed house in Godric's Hollow and pass him on to the Dursleys. This twist would have added an entirely new layer to the story. But in the final version, that role went to the gentle giant Hagrid. Number 2, Hermione's younger sister. Rowling also toyed with the idea of giving Hermione a younger sister, a regular muggle girl who would have served as a stark contrast to her magical sibling. But the character never left the shadows. Rowling felt her presence wouldn't significantly affect the plot. Besides, Hermione's parents already had a modest role in the books. Number 3, Theodore Nott, Malfoy's shadow. There was no shortage of antagonists in the series, but Rowling considered adding another one, a Slytherin named Theodore Nott. He was meant to be a more dangerous and intellectual rival to Harry than Draco Malfoy, clever, brooding, and the son of a Death Eater, a potential real threat. However, Rowling chose instead to delve deeper into Malfoy's character, and Theodore remained a blurry figure on the sidelines, a rare silhouette in the crowd. Number 4, Dudley's son, a Hogwarts student. In the final chapters of the saga, we saw hints of change in Dudley Dursley's character. From a bully, he had grown into, well, almost a decent human being. Rowling considered taking it further and showing, in the epilogue, that Dudley's own son was off to Hogwarts. Picture it. Dudley standing on platform 934, watching as his child vanishes into the steam. But Rowling decided magic couldn't override Vernon Dursley's DNA. Whatever potential wizard genes might exist in that line, they'd never beat Vernon's DNA, she joked. Number 5, Mopsy, the woman who sheltered Sirius. Dogs were far less common in the series than cats. Yet we nearly met Mopsy, a kind woman who was supposed to take in Sirius Black in his dog form. Her character would have shown that even in the magical world, there are people who care about homeless animals. But the scene was cut. Perhaps editors felt it wasn't essential. A shame, really. It would have been nice to see a fellow dog lover among the magical creature's fans. Number 6, Mafalda Weasley, the ambitious Slytherin. The Weasleys are the embodiment of Gryffindor. But Rowling once considered introducing a character who would shake up that notion. Mafalda Weasley, Ron's cousin, was supposed to be sorted into Slytherin and become Hermione's academic rival. Smart, sharp-tongued and deeply inquisitive, Mafalda might have played a key role in revealing some of Rita Skeeter's secrets. But in the end, Rowling left her out of the main narrative entirely. Number 7, an alternate fate for Ron, death midway. The series had a happy ending for its main trio. But there was a time when J.K. Rowling seriously considered killing off Ron Weasley halfway through the story. With the stakes growing darker, she imagined a tragic turn of events. In the end, she couldn't go through with it. As she later admitted, there was never a right moment, and fans might not have survived the heartbreak, especially in the final book, already saturated with grief and loss. Number 8, the return of Lily Potter as a ghost. She nearly walked the halls of Hogwarts again. In early drafts of Chamber of Secrets, J.K. Rowling considered bringing Lily Potter back, not in memory, but in form, a ghost. She would have appeared to Harry at a moment of deep danger, perhaps within the chamber itself, offering him guidance or revealing something crucial about Voldemort. Her presence would have been gentle, glowing, and full of sorrow. The mother he never truly knew, returning not with warmth, but with warnings. But Rowling chose silence instead. "If the dead return too easily," she once said, "their deaths lose weight." Lily had already appeared once, in the golden mist of Priori Incantatem during Harry's duel with Voldemort in Goblet of Fire. "Your father's coming," she whispered then. "Hold on." That moment held power because it was brief. Echoes, nothing more. Making Lily a lingering ghost would have robbed her sacrifice of its finality. Harry had to carry her love, not her voice. That was the true magic. Number 9, an alternative defense against the dark arts teacher, a woman. There was almost a different kind of teacher waiting in the defense against the dark arts classroom. A woman, powerful, enigmatic. In Rowling's early notes, this unnamed witch had once walked the halls of Hogwarts as a student, only to be expelled for practicing forbidden magic. She would return years later, not as a villain but as a mystery. Her methods were harsh, her loyalties unclear. She would have challenged Harry not just with spells, but with questions he wasn't ready to answer. Was power always dangerous? Could darkness be used for good? But the idea faded. Rowling feared she might steal too much attention. Her charisma, her past, her moral greyness, it all threatened to unbalance the trio. Instead, we met Dolores Umbridge, a villain cloaked in pink and cruelty, and the energy that had once fueled the mysterious teacher was poured into Bellatrix Lestrange, a dark mirror of what that character might have become. Still, it's easy to imagine the story with her in it. Standing at the front of the class, wand in hand, asking Harry, "Tell me, Mr. Potter, how far would you go to stop him?" Number 10. The death of Arthur Weasley. Arthur Weasley was supposed to die. The moment is still there in Order of the Phoenix. Harry jerks awake in Dumbledore's office, his scar burning, his voice trembling. It was a snake. I was the snake. He had just watched Nagini tear into Arthur, fangs sinking deep. For a time, that scene was meant to be Arthur's last. J.K. Rowling admitted she planned to kill him to show the war was real, to show that not even the kindest father in the series was safe. But something stopped her. "I couldn't do it," she later said. "The Weasley family needed him. The readers needed him." Without Arthur, the burrow would have felt hollow. He was the quiet strength behind Molly's fire, the balance to her fierce love. He gave Harry a glimpse of what a father could be, gentle, curious, deeply human. Losing him would have shifted the tone of the book into grief too soon. Instead, Rowling made another choice. Sirius died. A godfather lost in a veil, swallowed by shadows in the Department of Mysteries. His death hurt, but it fit. Sirius lived on the edge. Arthur, by contrast, was the heart of home. And some hearts, Rowling decided, were too vital to break. Number 11, Harry in Slytherin. The Sorting Hat paused. "You could be great, you know. It's all here, in your head. And Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness, no doubt about that." In that moment, everything could have changed. J.K. Rowling considered it. What if Harry had whispered "okay" instead of "not Slytherin"? What if he'd stepped down from that stool and taken his place next to Draco Malfoy? In this alternate path, Harry wouldn't just fight darkness, he'd live in the middle of it. Surrounded by pure blood pride and cold ambition, he would have had to find himself while walking the edge. His closest allies might have been Blaise Zabini or even Theodore Nott, students who were clever, dangerous, and not entirely loyal. There would be no Rubeus Hagrid offering birthday cakes, no Ron with a sandwich, no Hermione correcting his Latin. He would have eaten with the snakes and learned to read the room before speaking. The story would have grown darker, more psychological. Imagine Harry in his second year, hearing the voice in the walls. But this time, everyone around him thinks it's him, not just because he's Parselmouth, but because he's a Slytherin. Suspicion would follow him down every corridor. Would he still save Ginny in the Chamber of Secrets? Would he even be allowed to? The friendships that carried him through book after book, simply wouldn't exist. And without them, who would Harry become? Rowling chose light. She chose friendship and loyalty and warmth. She placed Harry among those who would teach him not just magic, but love. "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are," Dumbledore said. Harry chose Gryffindor. And that single choice shaped the boy who lived, not into someone feared for his potential, but someone remembered for his heart. Number 12, Dumbledore and his curse. There was always something haunted in Dumbledore's eyes, something flickering behind his calm, his bursts of laughter, his sudden silences, his habit of turning serious when no one else noticed. The danger, those weren't just quirks. In one of J.K. Rowling's early drafts, there was a reason. Dumbledore was cursed, not by a single object or enemy, but by a slow, creeping enchantment that began years before Harry even arrived at Hogwarts. A curse that would quietly unravel his body and mind, turning brilliance into burden. This original idea would have explained so much: why he trusted the wrong people, why he hesitated, why at times he seemed like he was racing against a clock only he could hear. Rowling imagined him suffering in secret, hiding the toll it took. It wasn't until the Half-Blood Prince that she finally gave the curse a shape, the Ring of Marvolo Gaunt. Dumbledore destroys it, and in doing so, poisons himself. "I was a fool," he says. "I thought I could master it." But by then, his death was already sealed. If Rowling had revealed the curse earlier, Dumbledore might have become something darker, not just a mentor, but a tragic time bomb. Readers would have questioned his every move. Was he acting out of wisdom or madness? Even his plan with Snape to die by the wand would have felt like desperation. But Rowling kept the mystery intact. She wanted Dumbledore to remain just out of reach, brilliant, fallible, and unreadable until the very end. His final moments reflect that restraint. In the tower, facing Draco, there's no fear in his voice, only calm. "Draco, you are not a killer." He knows what's coming, knows it must happen. The curse had already hollowed him out. Rowling let the wound surface only in the final book, a secret kept until it could no longer be hidden. Number 13, Madame Pomfrey's dark past. Madame Pomfrey was always there, stern, efficient, unshakable. Broken bones? "Oh, honestly, it's not even that bad," she'd mutter as she waved her wand. Petrification? "We'll fix them all," she promised when the Chamber of Secrets was opened. She patched up Harry more times than anyone could count. Yet behind her white apron and tidy bun, Rowling once imagined a darker story. In early drafts of Order of the Phoenix, Pomfrey had a past. Not just a school nurse, not just a healer, a former combat witch, one who had fought in magical skirmishes long before Voldemort rose to power. She wasn't supposed to just know healing magic, she was supposed to know how to fight. Rowling envisioned her as someone who had been on the battlefield, who had seen curses not found in any schoolbook, the kind of woman who had once fought beside witches like Marlene McKinnon and Dorcas Meadows. She was even meant to have a personal connection to Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, perhaps a former comrade or field medic during the first whispers of the Order. But that thread never made it into canon. Rowling later said it made Pomfrey too tied to the Order's drama. She wanted Poppy to remain neutral, an island of calm in the storm. In a world where every adult had an agenda, Madame Pomfrey was supposed to be different, someone who healed without asking questions, who didn't take sides. "You're not leaving this hospital wing until I say so," she snapped at Harry in The Half-Blood Prince, not because of politics, but because she cared. Still, the idea lingers like a ghost behind her. Maybe that's why she always moved so fast, why her spells were so precise. Maybe that's why she didn't flinch when Harry arrived bleeding and broken. She'd seen worse, much worse. The past may have stayed off the page, but some parts of it still seem to echo in the corners of the hospital wing. Number 14, Hermione's pet, not Crookshanks. Hermione's cat, Crookshanks, first appears in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. With his flat face, bottle-brush tail, and a mind of his own, he quickly becomes one of the most memorable animal companions in the series. But early drafts of the book painted a different picture. J.K. Rowling originally planned to give Hermione a raven, a dark, sleek bird that would perch on her shoulder like a magical advisor. Mysterious, intelligent, and tied to ancient symbolism, the raven would have served as a sign of Hermione's deep intellect, and perhaps even a hidden connection to Dumbledore's network. But the idea didn't sit right. Rowling later admitted that the raven felt too cold, too gothic for Hermione. A bird of prophecy and death didn't match the heart and warmth of the girl who once cried over house elves. Crookshank's half-Kneazle was the perfect compromise. Magical, yes, but still grounded. He wasn't a typical pet. He was intuitive, watchful, and fiercely loyal. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, he immediately distrusts Ron's rat Scabbers. "That cat's got it in for Scabbers," Ron protests. But of course, Crookshanks was right. Scabbers was no ordinary rat. He was Peter Pettigrew in disguise. Without Crookshanks, that entire subplot may have unraveled. The cat's uncanny sense for deceit helped move the story forward. He even teamed up with Sirius Black in his animagus form, passing him passwords and helping him get into Gryffindor Tower. A raven, for all its symbolism, could never have performed these very practical roles. And Hermione, for all her logic, needed a companion who was a little bit wild, a little bit odd, and who didn't care for rules. Number 15, Neville's alternate fate. There was a time, early in the drafts of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when the fate of Neville Longbottom stood on a knife's edge, not in the literal sense, as it often did during his Hogwarts years, but in the cruel, irreversible way that only a writer can dictate. J.K. Rowling, with her hands hovering over the strings of her beloved characters, once considered sacrificing him for the sake of a more tragic narrative. And not just any death, a noble, selfless act in which Neville would step between Harry and the killing curse, offering his life so the boy who lived might live again. It's difficult now to imagine the end of the saga without Neville's shining moment, the gleam of the sword of Gryffindor as it sliced through the neck of Voldemort's last Horcrux. But in an alternate draft, that sword never swung. The crowd at Hogwarts never roared. Instead, there would have been stunned silence, the echo of a body hitting the ground, and the cold realization that the clumsy, kind boy who once struggled with a remembrall had given everything he had, and more. From the beginning, Neville was marked by vulnerability. In the Philosopher's Stone, he is described as a round-faced boy who looked as though he'd been brought up by someone with a great many rules. He was forgetful, awkward, and chronically underestimated. But as the series progressed, readers began to understand that Neville's strength did not lie in magical skill or cleverness, but in the sheer depth of his heart, in the courage that manifested not in dazzling displays, but in quiet acts of loyalty. Rowling herself admitted that for a long time she viewed Neville as the other chosen one. In the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore confirms what fans had long suspected. "The odd thing is, Harry," he said, "that it may not have meant you at all. Sybil's prophecy could have applied to 2 boys. The prophecy, that the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord would be born at the end of July, applied equally to Harry and Neville. Voldemort's choice to target Harry sealed his fate. But what if he had chosen differently? Neville's alternative destiny could have been darker. In those early drafts of Book 7, Rowling envisioned a moment in which Neville, perhaps during the chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts, would recognize that Harry was in mortal danger, that Voldemort, wand-raised, was about to end everything, and in a flash of Gryffindor bravery, Neville would dive in front of the curse, he would fall, and Harry would be saved. It would be a death worthy of legend, echoing the noble sacrifices of those who came before, Lily Potter, Sirius Black, Albus Dumbledore. And yet, Rowling hesitated. The idea, though powerful, carried with it a dangerous implication. It suggested that Neville's growth from a timid boy to a true warrior could only be validated through death, that in order to prove himself equal, he must pay the ultimate price. But as Rowling later said in interviews, the message she wanted to deliver was the opposite, that survival, not sacrifice, was sometimes the braver path, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things and live to tell the tale. This decision preserved one of the most cathartic moments in the entire series. In the final battle, when all seems lost and Voldemort boasts of Harry's death, it is Neville who steps forward. The Sorting Hat is conjured, fire and fury erupt. Voldemort mocks him. "Who is this? Who stands against me?" And yet Neville does not waver. From the flames he pulls the sword, and in a single fluid motion he kills Nagini, the last Horcrux, the final anchor. There is a poetic justice in this act, for it was Bellatrix Lestrange, Voldemort's most devoted servant, who tortured Neville's parents into madness, and it is Bellatrix's master whom Neville helps destroy. The symbolism is devastatingly perfect. Neville, the boy whose very life was shaped by Voldemort's evil, is the one to strike the final blow. Harry, of course, finishes Voldemort himself. But Voldemort is mortal by then, his protection gone. Without Nagini's death, Harry's victory would have been impossible. In a very real way, it is Neville who topples the Dark Lord's empire. There's a line in the Deathly Hallows that often goes unnoticed, yet it carries enormous weight. As Harry watches from under his invisibility cloak, he sees Neville rallying the remnants of the resistance. It was not as though he had not had practice. People had been attempting to kill him all year. That sentence captures everything. Neville had become the leader of Dumbledore's army in Harry's absence. He had been tortured, beaten, nearly killed, and still he stood. Imagine then what we would have lost had Rowling chosen the darker path. The sight of Neville walking forward, limping, bleeding, teeth gritted, the cheer that erupted as he raised the sword, the wide eyes of the younger students who looked to him not just as a peer, but as a hero, the final redemption of a boy once mocked for his forgetfulness and cowardice. There is another detail, one often overlooked, that gives deeper texture to Neville's arc: his wand. For most of the series he uses a hand-me-down, but in Deathly Hallows he is finally given his own. "This is my wand," he tells Harry. "It's cherry and unicorn hair, 12¼ inches, springy." It's a small gesture, but it marks a turning point, a symbol of identity and confidence. He no longer hides behind others. He no longer apologizes for being himself. The same Neville who once cowered at the mere mention of Snape now led students into the Forbidden Forest to resist tyranny. He laid traps, sabotaged the Carrows, hid escapees in the Room of Requirement. Luna Lovegood described him best when she said, "He's not alone, you know. He's got me and Ginny and all of us." Neville had become the heart of the resistance, not through destiny, but through choice. Number 16. Draco and the Death Eaters, a broken bond. Draco Malfoy always stood at the edge of two worlds, the icy aristocratic heritage of the Malfoy name and the silent stormy tide of his own awakening conscience. The world knew him as a pure-blood elitist, a boy bred on privilege, pride, and the unwavering loyalty of old families to the Dark Lord. But behind the cold grey eyes and haughty sneer, J.K. Rowling once imagined a different Draco, a version who shattered the expectations laid upon him, not through redemption, but through retreat. In early drafts of The Half-Blood Prince, Draco was not meant to walk the trembling line of a reluctant soldier. He was to walk away altogether. This alternate Draco, burdened by the unbearable task assigned to him, the assassination of Albus Dumbledore, would not have accepted the mark, nor completed the mission. Instead, he would have vanished from the shadows of Hogwarts, absconding into the wizarding world like a ghost. There, hunted by both Death Eaters and the Order, he would become an exile, a child caught in the crossfire of a war too vast for his young hands to mould. The boy who once mocked Harry for not choosing the right sort of people would himself be discarded by both sides. In this version of the story, Draco's moment of collapse would have come earlier. Perhaps it would have begun in the Room of Requirement, surrounded by broken vanishing cabinets and broken illusions, as the weight of the task broke over him like a wave. Narcissa's pleading with Snape in Spinner's End would still have happened, but the unbreakable vow might never have had to be fulfilled. Draco would have made his own choice, not of courage, not of nobility, but of fear and confusion, wrapped in the desperate instinct to survive. The son of Lucius would disappear not with defiance, but with quiet despair. Rowling's notes reportedly sketched a hidden arc where Draco, instead of moving toward redemption in Deathly Hallows, would become a fugitive. His days would be spent in nameless inns, disillusioned, hiding behind aliases. The Ministry, already collapsing under Voldemort's grip, would brand him a traitor. Bellatrix Lestrange would thirst for his blood, not because he failed, but because he betrayed the sanctity of the Malfoy name. In this fragile existence, he would encounter two unlikely souls, Luna Lovegood and Neville Longbottom, outcasts themselves, fighting from the margins of a crumbling world. One could imagine the scene as Rowling envisioned it in her early drafts: Draco, gaunt and mud-smeared, wand clutched in trembling fingers, stepping cautiously into a shattered greenhouse where Neville crouched beside Luna, both fugitives from the Carrow's cruelty at Hogwarts. No words would pass between them, but recognition would shimmer in the silence. Not of friendship, but of shared exile. Three broken children, unarmed not in magic, but in direction, briefly united in the vastness of their isolation. Such a scene would have marked a profound departure from canon. In Deathly Hallows, Draco remains in the Malfoy Manor, his loyalties fraying but intact, a reluctant observer of Voldemort's rise. In this alternate story, however, his family would no longer be his shield. He would not be present when Harry and his friends were brought to the manor. He would not be there to hesitate when asked if the boy before him was Harry Potter. Instead, his face would be on wanted posters, his name spat in whispers. Even the Malfoys would not speak of him. He would become a ghost. Yet this narrative, Rowling decided, was too stark a divergence. It offered no arc of redemption, no gradual softening of the boy who once snarled at Muggleborns in the corridors. There would be no moment, as in Deathly Hallows, when he silently chooses not to identify Harry. No trembling hand extended to grasp a wand on the floor, no final glimpse of him pulling Goyle from the fiend fire. He had a choice, Rowling would later reflect, and in the end he chose not to keep going down that path. That quote belongs to the Draco we know, not the one who ran. Still, the idea of Draco as a runaway lingers in the bones of the narrative. Even in the published Half-Blood prints, we see hints of this internal erosion. "I have to do this," he says in a rare moment of honesty. "He'll kill me otherwise." This is not the language of a fanatic. It is the language of a frightened child. The boy who once saw his father as invincible now sees him humiliated in Azkaban. The Dark Lord has taken over his home, twisted it into a palace of punishment. The terror in Draco's eyes when Dumbledore lowers his wand is not the fear of failure. It is the fear of becoming the killer he was never meant to be. In keeping Draco within the castle walls, Rowling preserved the essential tragedy of his arc. He did not betray Voldemort out loud. He did not stand beside Harry in battle, but neither did he kill. He froze. And in that frozen moment, a boy, a wand, a headmaster on a tower, he showed more defiance than 1,000 spells could convey. He showed the world that he was not his father's son, not entirely. And perhaps that small fracture was more powerful than rebellion. But what if that fracture had broken open completely? What if Draco had truly fled? Rowling's notes suggest that he would have been found eventually, not by Death Eaters, but by Dumbledore's allies. He might have been taken to Shell Cottage, or hidden by Aberforth in the Hog's Head. Fleur Delacour, ever gentle, might have brought him soup. He might have woken in the Burrow's attic bed, listening to Arthur Weasley hammering outside, pretending for a moment that he was just a boy again, safe in someone else's story. Number 17, A Wizard from America. In the shadowy corridors of magical history there exists a story that was nearly told. a path Rowling considered then veered away from. It is a tale not of Harry, Hermione, or Ron, but of a wizard from America. Long before the Fantastic Beasts franchise flickered to life, before Ilvermorny became a whisper on Pottermore, there was a moment, a possibility, when an American student might have walked into the Triwizard Tournament shoulder to shoulder with the champions of Beauxbaton and Durmstrang. But that wizard never came. Their wand never sparked against a dragon's roar. And the silence of their absence speaks volumes about how the Harry Potter world almost widened much sooner. When Rowling began drafting The Goblet of Fire, she was already building a labyrinth of new characters and plot lines. The fourth installment in the saga marked a turning point, darker, broader, and global in scope. The arrival of two foreign schools, Beauxbaton, an elegant French academy nestled in the Pyrenees, and Durmstrang, a formidable northern institution with a murky reputation, expanded the magical universe beyond the familiar turrets of Hogwarts. But among these international guests, Rowling considered a third name, one not European but American. She even named the school Ilvermorny. Ilvermorny, Rowling later revealed, would have been nestled on Mount Greylock in Massachusetts. Founded in the 17th century by Isolde Sayre, a descendant of Salazar Slytherin himself, the school bore the fierce independence of the New World. It blended European traditions with indigenous magic, developing a character all its own, a fusion of old blood and new soil. But in the Goblet of Fire, its representative never stepped through the enchanted doors of the Great Hall. The Triwizard Tournament remained a battle of three, Hogwarts, Beauxbaton, and Durmstrang, leaving America's magical presence untapped. In interviews, Rowling confessed that she had considered introducing an American wizard as a fourth champion. The Triwizard Tournament, she admitted, might have briefly become the Quadwizard Tournament, stretching the magical competition even further. But she refrained. The plot was already bulging at the seams, she said. Indeed, with the return of Voldemort looming and the threads of Barty Crouch Jr.'s deception tightening around the Triwizard Cup, there was scarcely room for another subplot. The presence of an American school would have demanded its own mythos, its own rules, and a character compelling enough to hold their own against the likes of Victor Crumb and Fleur Delacour. Imagine for a moment that fourth name emerging from the Goblet of Fire. Not Cedric Diggory, but perhaps a character like Jeremiah Whitlock, a thunder-hearted student from Ilvermorny's Thunderbird house. He might have arrived with a wand carved from a lightning-struck birch, his robes bearing the emblem of the horned serpent. His accent would have felt strange among the stone walls of Hogwarts, his spells perhaps unfamiliar. In contrast to the formality of Beauxbaton or the brute pride of Durmstrang, this American wizard might have brought a more pragmatic, untamed magic, less wand work, more instinct. His inclusion would have raised fascinating questions. How did Ilvermorny choose its champions? Was there a magical bond between schools like the European tradition? Did Ilvermorny even observe the same magical laws as the Ministry of Magic in London? These are inquiries Rowling knew she would have to address. And in the face of a narrative already brimming with Yule balls, dragons and graveyards, the American wizard was quietly erased. Yet the ghost of Ilvermorny lingered. Rowling, ever the archivist of her own universe, did not discard the idea but saved it, developing it in quieter corners of the franchise. On Pottermore, she unveiled the lore behind Ilvermorny, its founders, houses, and values. We learned of Pukwudgies, mischievous creatures that served as unlikely allies to its founders. We read of the school's founding by a muggle-born witch and her no-mage husband, a story mirroring, in some ways, the themes of unity and resilience at Hogwarts. In truth, the idea of a global magical world would become central to Rowling's later work. In Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the character of Tina Goldstein, an Ilvermorny graduate and MACUSA, Magical Congress of the United States of America agent, became the face of American wizardry. Here, at last, Rowling explored the cultural tensions between British and American magical societies, their differing views on secrecy, blood status, and cooperation with Muggle governments, but this came years after the Goblet of Fire, and the fictional moment had passed. Still we wonder, had that American wizard stood on the field with Cedric, Harry, Fleur and Victor, how might the story have shifted? Would he have seen through Barty Crouch Jr.'s disguise? Would his spells have offered new solutions to the tasks? Perhaps in the underwater challenge, his knowledge of the Grindylows native to the Great Lakes might have surprised even Professor Moody. Or in the final graveyard, an extra wand might have delayed Voldemort's resurrection by precious seconds. Even the social dynamics at Hogwarts might have changed. An American student unfamiliar with the ancient bloodlines and rivalries of British wizarding families might have questioned the rituals others took for granted. He might have befriended Luna before anyone else did, or clashed with Draco Malfoy in ways more explosive than Harry ever managed. His presence might have acted as a mirror reflecting the idiosyncrasies of Hogwarts back at itself. What makes this path not taken so intriguing is its potential to challenge the British insularity of the early books. The wizarding world, as first presented, is tightly bound to the United Kingdom. Spells have Latin roots, institutions resemble English boarding schools, and even magical creatures adhere to Western mythologies. Ilvermorny would have disrupted that, bringing in indigenous lore, North American magical beasts, and a different interpretation of wizarding ethics. Number 18, a prophecy for Hermione. In the world of Harry Potter, prophecy is a dangerous thing. It tempts fate, pulls at the strings of destiny, and binds the lives of wizards and witches in patterns even they cannot see. Everyone remembers the chilling words of Sybil Trelawney, spoken in a trance in a dusty room above the three broomsticks. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Those words marked Harry Potter as the chosen one, tying his life inextricably to Lord Voldemort's. But what if there had been another prophecy, quieter, less deadly, yet still powerful in its own right? What if, buried in the forgotten corners of Rowling's notebooks, there was a prophecy not of death and destruction, but of wisdom and light? One meant for Hermione Granger. It was never spoken in the books. It never made it to the silver screen. But in early drafts, Rowling imagined a second prophecy, delivered once again through the half-mad murmurings of Professor Trelawney. During one of her fog-filled divination classes, as the scent of incense hung thick and students tried to stifle yawns, Trelawney would suddenly straighten, her voice would change, her eyes would roll back, and she would whisper, "She who brings the light of knowledge shall be the lantern in the storm. When darkness reigns and minds fall to fear, the wise shall lead." Those around her wouldn't understand, most wouldn't care, but in retrospect it would be Hermione's moment, a moment of quiet fate. Rowling would ultimately choose to cut the prophecy. She feared it would elevate Hermione's role in a way that undermined one of the character's most essential qualities, her hard-earned brilliance. Hermione Granger, the girl who learned about the wizarding world from books instead of blood, who memorized laws and counter-curses with the same devotion she gave to friendship, didn't need fate to tell her who she was. Rowling believed her strength lay not in destiny, but in choice, in study, in sweat and parchment. Yet the idea of a prophecy lingers like the ghost of a plot never written. The draft line, "a witch bearing the light of knowledge in the chaos of war," resonates not because it's poetic, but because it is so painfully true. Throughout the war against Voldemort, Hermione becomes more than the clever sidekick. She is a moral compass, a strategist, a protector, and a guardian of wisdom when the world around her collapses into fear and hatred. Her mind becomes the battlefield's brightest weapon, sharper than any wand. Take, for example, her preparation for their mission to destroy Horcruxes. While Harry grappled with the weight of prophecy and Ron struggled with insecurity, it was Hermione who filled a beaded bag with everything they might need, who learned protective enchantments strong enough to keep them hidden from Death Eaters. Her mind never stopped working. In Deathly Hallows, as they flee from the Ministry, it is Hermione's enchantments that keep them safe. She had done all the protective enchantments Hermione had painstakingly researched, muggle-repelling charms, disillusionment charms, and even a handful of ancient spells that had not been used for centuries. These weren't skills taught in a classroom. They were the result of obsession, of hours in the library while others slept or played. It's not far-fetched to say that without her, Harry and Ron wouldn't have lasted a week. The contrast between her and Trelawney is especially rich. Trelawney, the prophet without power, spends most of her time draped in shawls and sipping sherry, while Hermione, who scoffs at divination as woolly, becomes the very embodiment of the prophecy that never was. Ironically, the one girl who rejected fate becomes its greatest silent fulfillment. The girl who left class in a huff when Trelawney predicted her early death was all along the bearer of wisdom in wartime, not because the stars said so, but because she chose to be. Even Dumbledore, who famously saw value in choices over prophecy, seemed to understand Hermione's unique strength. He entrusted her with a copy of the Tales of Beedle the Bard, knowing she would be the one to unlock the meaning behind the Deathly Hallows symbol, the one to recognize the deeper messages buried in fairy tales. It was she who solved the mystery of the mark Xenophilius Lovegood wore around his neck. She who read the story of the three brothers not as a bedtime fable, but as a key to understanding Voldemort's obsession with immortality. The war was not won by prophecy alone, but by understanding, and Hermione understood. There's a moment in The Half-Blood Prince, subtle and easily missed, when Harry and Ron are stunned by Hermione's quick thinking in a moment of magical chaos. She doesn't celebrate the attention. She simply sighs and returns to her book, the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders even before the final battles begin. There is no glory in her magic. It is not the flash of a duel or the thrill of prophecy. It is steady, quiet, powerful, and essential. Even in the darkest parts of their journey, Hermione remains the stabilizing force. In the forest, when morale is at its lowest and Ron abandons them, it is Hermione who holds herself together, who tries to keep Harry from falling into despair. She's not unbreakable. Her quiet sobs behind the trees remind us she's still a teenager. But she never stops moving forward. She continues because she must, because someone has to carry the light. Her leadership is especially evident during their time at the Ministry, when Polyjuice swapped and paranoid, they navigate the bureaucratic heart of a fascist regime. It's Hermione who controls the plan, who directs Harry and Ron with clear eyes and firm words. The trio might be equal in loyalty and courage, but in moments of crisis, it is Hermione who leads. She was the best in our year, Ron tells Harry during one of their many near-death moments, not just in grades, but in everything that mattered. Imagine, then, if that discarded prophecy had remained. If one of Trelawney's trances had suddenly hinted at a girl who would lead not with a sword, but with knowledge. Perhaps had it been spoken aloud, Hermione's actions would have been seen through a different lens. The world loves a chosen one. It doesn't always know what to do with a self-made heroine. Prophecy might have granted her narrative legitimacy, but it would have also stolen her thunder. Her glory was that of someone who chose to fight, not because she had to, but because she refused to let ignorance win. It's important to remember that Rowling was deliberate in removing that prophecy. She wanted Hermione to be admired for her discipline, her loyalty, and her empathy, not because fate had marked her. In a way, this makes Hermione's role in the story even more powerful. Unlike Harry, she had no magical protection from love or ancient enchantments. Unlike Ron, she had no deep familial ties to the wizarding world. She was a muggle-born, unwelcome in the very halls she had mastered, yet she never let that stop her. She continued to learn even as the Ministry hunted her kind. She erased her parents' memories to protect them, a spell so complex and emotionally devastating that no 14-year-old should know it, let alone use it. And she did it without hope of recognition or thanks. That kind of magic isn't the stuff of wand duels. It is quiet, heartbreaking and mature. A different kind of power, a different kind of heroism. There is a haunting beauty in imagining the alternate version of events, where Trelawney's prophecy about Hermione was canon. It would have framed her entire journey as an act of destiny, a girl born to lead minds through madness. But it also would have robbed readers of one of the most inspiring character arcs in the series. Hermione's greatness wasn't foretold, it was earned. She rose through the ranks not with a prophecy at her back, but with ink-stained fingers and a head full of spells. The wizarding world after Voldemort's fall would rebuild itself on many shoulders. Kingsley Shacklebolt, Minerva McGonagall, Neville Longbottom, all would play their part. But there's a quiet revolution beneath it all, a shift toward knowledge, tolerance, and structure. That was Hermione's doing. Years later, she would go on to reform the laws that once oppressed her, to bring logic and empathy into a world that once tried to push her out. No prophecy could have foretold that. It was simply who she was. Perhaps that's what makes the lost prophecy so compelling. It wasn't needed, it was never spoken, yet it came true in every sense. In every spell memorized, in every law challenged, in every friend protected, Hermione fulfilled the vision of a witch who would carry knowledge through war, not because it was written in the stars, but because she refused to let ignorance win. And in that, perhaps, lies the truest magic of all. Number 19, Albus Dumbledore, a father. Among the countless fan theories that swirled like ghostly whispers through the halls of Hogwarts forums and midnight discussions, one has always stood apart, not for its plausibility, but for its sheer audacity. The theory claimed that Albus Dumbledore, the ever-enigmatic headmaster of Hogwarts, was secretly someone's father. At first glance, the notion seemed to border on absurdity. Dumbledore, the embodiment of wisdom and restraint, a figure draped in solitude and scars, didn't appear to have space in his life for family, especially not one he had hidden. And yet there is more truth to this fantasy than many suspect. According to whispers from the backstage of the wizarding world, even J.K. Rowling herself once flirted with this idea. During her early planning stages for the latter Harry Potter books, she considered introducing a mysterious character, a powerful, somewhat aloof young man who would come to Harry's aid at a moment of great peril. This character, unnamed in the outlines but vividly sketched in tone and temperament, was to carry a secret that would shake the magical world. He was Dumbledore's son. Imagine the weight of that revelation, introduced perhaps in The Half-Blood Prince or The Deathly Hallows, a figure who bore in his blood the same quiet power, the same twinkle of pain in his eyes. Dumbledore, as Rowling envisioned him, had once loved a Muggle woman. It was a short-lived affair, likely during his years of travel after his tragic entanglement with Gellert Grindelwald, and well before he returned to Hogwarts to teach Transfiguration. Their love, fleeting but real, resulted in the birth of a child, a boy. But Dumbledore, drowning in guilt over Ariana's death and his disastrous partnership with Grindelwald, fled from the possibility of a family. Such a storyline would have introduced complex new dimensions to the Dumbledore we thought we knew. Until then, the headmaster was a man of deep regrets, of burdens he bore alone. Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love, he told Harry in the Deathly Hallows. These were not idle words. Dumbledore spoke from experience. The love of his youth for Gellert ended in heartbreak, betrayal, and a sister's grave. To imagine that after that devastation he found solace, even briefly, in the arms of a Muggle woman is both haunting and profoundly human, but Rowling ultimately abandoned the idea. Why? Because it would have shifted the philosophical heart of the character. Dumbledore's story, as she decided, was about a man who chose loneliness as penance. The weight of his past was not something he could put down or pass on to another. It defined his actions, his secrets, and even his manipulations of Harry. As she later explained in interviews, to make Dumbledore a father would have risked turning him into something more familiar, less mythical, less tragic, more tangible, and Dumbledore, more than most, was not meant to be tangible. Still, the remnants of this idea linger in the books. One need not look far to see traces of paternal behavior in Dumbledore's interactions with Harry, not just as a mentor, not merely as a general in a war for souls, but as someone who felt a deeply personal obligation to protect and guide. When he confesses in The Half-Blood Prince that he should have told Harry the truth much earlier, there is a tremor of guilt that goes beyond strategic error. It is the guilt of a man who knows he has failed someone who trusts him completely. "I cared about you too much," he admits, as if caught between roles he never truly mastered. leader, mentor, and perhaps, in another lifetime, a father. Dumbledore's own childhood is crucial to this theory's allure. Abandoned by his ambitions after Ariana's death, forced into a caretaker's role for his younger brother Aberforth and their unstable home, he never had a real chance to grow into himself. The Dumbledore we meet in the books is a man built from grief and responsibility. It's not impossible to imagine that during a moment of respite, perhaps in the Muggle world where no one knew his name, he allowed himself to be vulnerable again. But the return to Hogwarts and his growing fear of his own power would have severed that brief connection, and he would have done what he always did, shut the door and buried the truth beneath layers of secrets. There is, however, one passage that always made some readers pause. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry destroys Dumbledore's possessions in a fit of rage after Sirius's death, Dumbledore lets him. He absorbs the storm. "You are not nearly as alone as you believe," he tells Harry. But he never says what he truly wants to. He never tells Harry about the part of himself that also yearned for family and lost it. If the secret son existed in an early draft, this moment might have been where Rowling intended to open the door just a crack. The potential son, let's call him Elias, for the sake of this reconstruction, would have been in his late 20s or early 30s by the events of the Deathly Hallows. Perhaps he'd lived in the shadows, quietly mastering obscure branches of magic, his identity known only to a few. Perhaps he was a squib, or an outcast, or someone who bore his father's name like a curse. The possibilities are endless, and each carries dramatic weight. Would Elias have stood beside Harry at the Battle of Hogwarts? Or would he have come too late, only to find his father already dead, fallen from the astronomy tower, his secrets unspoken? One can even imagine Aberforth knowing the truth. Aberforth, the bitter brother who never forgave Albus for putting ambition over family, might have been the reluctant guardian of Elias. It adds new meaning to Aberforth's coldness when he tells Harry, "Albus was always good at secrets. He kept so many of them." What if one of those secrets was a boy sent away, erased from the family name? This theory, compelling as it is, also resonates with deeper themes in the books: the tension between legacy and secrecy, the question of what we inherit from our parents, not just their blood, but their wounds. Elias, if he existed, would be a living embodiment of Dumbledore's paradox, a man capable of boundless love, yet terrified of it, a father who walked away not from indifference, but from shame. "It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness," Dumbledore once said. But perhaps it was the known, the son he'd left behind, that truly haunted him. It is also worth noting that Rowling gave Dumbledore many of the characteristics associated with fatherhood: sternness, forgiveness, guiding wisdom, and above all, sacrifice. In dying, he offered Harry the final lesson: how to walk into the dark with his head held high. In that sense, he became a symbolic father to Harry, as Sirius once called him, the only man Voldemort ever feared. That fear, perhaps, wasn't just for his power, but for the quiet, enduring love that Dumbledore hid so well. And yet there remains a tinge of sadness. Because the story of Dumbledore's imagined son is not one of grand heroism, it is one of absence. A missing chapter, a path not taken. Rowling ultimately chose the lonelier road for Albus, crafting his tragedy, not in what he did, but what he could never allow himself to have. This made him, paradoxically, even more human, a man whose life was shaped by the very emotions he sought to suppress. Still, if Elias had existed, he might have changed everything. Perhaps he and Harry would have clashed at first, both suspicious, both bearing scars from secrets withheld. But over time they might have come to see each other not as rivals, but as kindred spirits, two young men moulded by an old man's mistakes. Together they might have forged a new understanding of what it means to be chosen, not by prophecy but by blood. The absence of Elias also casts a shadow over the Fantastic Beasts films, where Dumbledore is depicted as a younger, more emotionally exposed man. The movies introduce his brother Aurelius, also known as Credence Barebone, which only fueled more speculation. Was this Rowling resurrecting the old idea under a new name? Some fans believe so. Aurelius, a troubled youth with immense power and a shattered identity, bears striking resemblance to the concept of a hidden Dumbledore child. Though canon later disputes this, the echoes remain. Perhaps that is the greatest testament to this theory's enduring power. Not that it's true, but that it could have been. That in some corner of the wizarding world beyond the pages and scripts, Dumbledore did have a son, and that this son, unnamed and unseen, still waits in the shadows of fan imagination, a ghost of a story Rowling chose not to tell. In the end, we are left with a Dumbledore who stands alone on the tower, wand raised, eyes burdened with memory. A man who knew too much, loved too hard, and lived too little for himself. Perhaps that is why we yearn to give him a child, not to change his story, but to complete it. To believe that even the most solitary figures leave behind echoes of love, and if he had a son, somewhere out there in the silence, it wouldn't diminish his mystery, it would deepen it. Because love, hidden or revealed, is never a weakness. For Dumbledore, it would have been his most human act of all. Number 20, a hero with a curse. In the earliest drafts of what would become one of the most beloved books in literary history, J.K. Rowling envisioned a character shrouded in secrecy, cursed by a force so ancient that even the wisest professors of Hogwarts feared to name it. This unnamed upper-year student was never given a spotlight in the final pages of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, but his ghost lingers behind the margins of the story. He was to be a boy consumed by darkness, not by his own volition, but because of an old magic that lived inside him. A curse placed upon him in infancy, like a shadow that grew with him, twisted how others saw him. Even within the enchanted walls of Hogwarts, where magical oddities were the norm, he was an anomaly. Rowling imagined him as a sixth-year Ravenclaw, a house typically associated with wisdom and wit. Yet this boy, whose name in early drafts was Sebastian Dunnett, bore none of the house's famed pride. Instead, he drifted through the castle like a ghost still clinging to life. Students whispered behind his back. They said he had once hexed a professor, that his eyes sometimes flickered red in candlelight. No one knew the truth, and perhaps that was part of the curse. Sebastian's presence alone chilled the corridors he passed. It wasn't a Dementor's chill, not the soul-sucking cold Harry would later face in The Prisoner of Azkaban, but a subtler discomfort, like the feeling of being watched in an empty room. Sebastian's curse was never explicitly defined in Rowling's early sketches, but she left breadcrumbs. In one notebook she described him as a student with a mark of ancient magic, banished by peers, yet crucial to the path of the hero. His role would have been small, yet powerful, appearing briefly in the Forbidden Forest during a critical scene. Rowling once noted that Sebastian would save Harry from a magical trap, then disappear into the darkness without thanks. His heroism was not the kind that earned house points. It was born of necessity, not valor. There was to be a passage in the original chapter layout for the Forbidden Forest scene where Harry strays too far from Hagrid and encounters something he cannot explain. Not the cloaked figure feeding on unicorn blood, but something older. A trap, a tangle of roots that acted like sentient chains, dragging him toward the earth. Just before he would black out, Sebastian was to appear from the trees. He would utter a curse-breaking incantation in a language Harry had never heard before. When Harry looked up, Sebastian would already be gone. This moment never made it past the outline stage, but its echo is clear in the final text. When Harry and Draco meet the mysterious hooded figure feeding on a unicorn, there is a shared sense of helplessness, dread, and darkness. Sebastian's removal from the story did not erase the tone he brought. It simply transmuted into the world's perception of Harry himself. He's famous, and he's not even 11, Ron Weasley scoffs early in the book. Fame, in this case, is not a blessing. It's a mark, a curse, dressed in gold. Sebastian's character was meant to challenge the reader's sense of good and evil. He wasn't a villain, yet he was feared. He wasn't a friend, yet he would save the hero. Rowling's decision to remove him stemmed from her desire to streamline the narrative. Too many shadows can dilute the light. But in removing Sebastian, she gave Harry the qualities once reserved for that cursed boy. The boy who lived became, in essence, the boy who was cursed. The scar on his forehead, given to him by Voldemort, wasn't just a mark of survival. It was a permanent reminder that his life would never be his own. Harry's status at Hogwarts is not unlike Sebastian's in those early notes. He is a celebrity, yes, but also a mystery. Everyone thinks I'm special, Harry thinks to himself at one point, but they don't know me. Even Hagrid, who introduces Harry to the wizarding world, adds to the mystique. You don't know what ye are, Harry. The wizarding world treats Harry with reverence, awe, and sometimes fear, not unlike how students would have treated Sebastian. By transferring the idea of the cursed hero from a separate character onto Harry, Rowling layered her protagonist with contradictions. Harry is beloved and misunderstood, protected and targeted. He is the chosen one and, simultaneously, a boy burdened by fate. This complexity forms the core of Harry's journey throughout the series. The prophecy introduced later in The Order of the Phoenix merely cements what was there from the start. Harry's destiny is not one he chose. Sebastian, had he remained, would have served as a mirror to Harry, not in opposition but as a reflection of what it means to carry a burden alone. In some ways, this mirror still exists in characters like Severus Snape, who walks the line between hero and villain, or even Sirius Black, falsely accused and misunderstood. But none of them are quite like Sebastian, who would have been an outsider among outsiders. Interestingly, remnants of Sebastian's archetype appear in the final story through characters like Luna Lovegood and even Neville Longbottom. Luna, with her dreamy detachment and social isolation, occupies the role of the misunderstood. Neville, once clumsy and dismissed, carries a deeper pain and strength that echoes Sebastian's original curse. In this way, Sebastian was never truly erased. He was diffused into many characters like starlight filtered through a prism. In The Chamber of Secrets, when Harry is accused of being the heir of Slytherin due to his Parseltongue ability, the fear of the cursed boy returns. "You're a Parselmouth. Why didn't you tell us?" Ron exclaims. Students begin to avoid Harry in the corridors. Whispers follow him. Even his friends start to question who he really is. Rowling revisits the theme that had once belonged solely to Sebastian. What happens when a hero is mistaken for a villain? This concept reaches a peak in The Order of the Phoenix, when Harry feels completely isolated. "They're all looking at me like I'm dangerous," he says. The Ministry's smear campaign paints him as delusional, even dangerous. The scar, once a symbol of survival, becomes a mark of suspicion. This is Sebastian's curse made flesh, the hero as a pariah. Rowling has never released full details of Sebastian Dunnett's storyline, but fragments remain in her early notes and drafts, stored in the archives of the British Library. She once wrote in the margins, "Too much. Sebastian overshadows Harry's burden." It was a crucial insight. One too many cursed boys would cloud the reader's sympathy. In fiction, as in magic, every element must serve a purpose. Still, the idea of a cursed student haunts the edges of Hogwarts lore. Fans have speculated for years about the origin of the Bloody Baron's madness, or the tragic fate of Moaning Myrtle. Yet Sebastian would have been different. Not a ghost of the past, but a living reminder that magic can mark people in ways no one else understands. It's tempting to wonder what Harry's journey would have looked like if Sebastian had remained. Would Harry have seen himself in the older boy? Would he have understood earlier the weight of being chosen, cursed, and cast aside? Perhaps Sebastian could have guided him through the loneliness. Perhaps he would have made Harry's burden feel less unique, and therefore more bearable. Even without him, Harry's experience is deeply shaped by the themes Sebastian embodied. The moments when Harry doubts himself, when he questions whether he is becoming like Voldemort, are echoes of the fear Sebastian was born to provoke. "I'm not like him," Harry insists in The Half-Blood Prince, after casting a nearly fatal spell. But the line between hero and villain is thin, especially when the world sees only the curse. It is likely for the best that Rowling chose to condense these roles into one character. The result is a protagonist who is not merely likable, but layered. By making Harry both the chosen one and the cursed one, she crafted a boy whose internal struggles are as compelling as his battles with dark magic. A boy who, like Sebastian, walks through shadows, but always keeps moving toward the light. In a way, readers still meet Sebastian not through a name, but through a feeling. That eerie sense in the first book, when the corridors of Hogwarts feel too quiet. When Harry looks at the mirror of Erised and sees not just his parents, but a life he can never have. When he touches the scar on his forehead and wonders if he'll ever be normal. That's Sebastian's legacy, not in the story, but in the atmosphere. Even today, as fans reread the series, they may pause at certain moments and sense the ghost of a character who never made it past the planning stage. A Ravenclaw with a cursed past, a sixth-year boy who walked alone, a hero who helped in secret. And though the world never knew his name, his story was never truly erased. It was simply rewritten into the lightning bolt on Harry Potter's brow. Number 21, a fearless muggle. Of all the tales tucked away in the margins of J.K. Rowling's notebooks, one of the most hauntingly unexplored is that of a muggle who, upon encountering the world of magic, did not run in fear. Unlike the Dursleys, who shrank from anything unnatural with pale lips and clenched fists, this muggle, unnamed, forgotten, but powerful in concept, stood his ground. He didn't recoil, he didn't deny. He understood, and more than that, he acted. In one early draft of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, this ordinary person was meant to do something extraordinary, offer sanctuary to a hunted member of the Order. A home, a roof, a warm meal during war. Imagine the story stretching through the alleys of London in the months when Lord Voldemort's return was only whispered in candlelit rooms and denied by the Ministry. Imagine a small, terraced house on a quiet street, Magnolia Road, or somewhere near it. Not unlike the Dursleys, except for one thing. Its owner was not afraid. This man, a librarian, in early notes by Rowling, was to become a bridge between the magical and non-magical world. His name was briefly considered to be Bernard Cleary. He read books late into the night, questioned everything, and lived alone save for a Persian cat named Edda. And one day, when the wards of number 12 Grimmauld Place strained against the growing weight of danger, a knock sounded at Bernard's door. He opened it to find Emmeline Vance, wounded, breathless, carrying more than a message, carrying knowledge. The Death Eaters were searching. Apparition had become traceable. The Order needed a place to hide someone, just for a few days. Bernard didn't flinch. He opened the door wider. "You'll find the bed in the back room," he said. "And I have tea." This concept challenged a long-standing trope in the wizarding world, that muggles, while occasionally comic or pitiable, rarely showed courage in the face of magic. The Dursleys, as readers know, embody that small-minded fear. Vernon snarls at letters in green ink. Petunia hisses about that awful boy, Severus Snape. "There's no such thing as magic," Vernon spits in a rage when Hagrid finally corners them in that hut on the rock. But here was Bernard, not only acknowledging magic, but assisting it, guided by instinct rather than fear. Rowling's idea, though later discarded, was to use him as a quiet reminder that bravery is not exclusive to those with wands. He was to hide Daedalus Diggle after a skirmish at the Leaky Cauldron. Diggle, flamboyant and eccentric, brought chaos into Bernard's neatly ordered world. Spell residue on the windows, galleons left on the bookshelf, toast that retoasted itself. But Bernard endured it all. More than that, he asked questions, and when Diggle left, he left behind a note in florid script. "You're braver than most wizards I know." The idea echoed Dumbledore's own wisdom, expressed in the Philosopher's Stone. It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends. In Bernard's case, it took courage simply to stand. Rowling, always attuned to narrative boundaries, ultimately dropped the idea. It was too far a stretch from Hogwarts, she later admitted in a private correspondence, archived in the British Library's Potter Papers collection. I feared it would dilute the tight structure of the Order's world. But it's clear that the concept didn't vanish completely. In later years, especially in the Fantastic Beasts series, one can see traces of Bernard's DNA in characters like Jacob Kowalski, a no-mage who, despite having no magic, becomes a trusted ally to Newt Scamander and even earns the love of Queenie Goldstein. Jacob bakes, smiles, loves, mourns, and never once recoils from the strange and the impossible. The difference, though, is tone. Jacob's world is filmed in golden hues with comic relief and sweeping music. Bernard's would have been quieter, darker. The Order of the Phoenix is steeped in dread and paranoia. Inserting a muggle into that world as a quiet hero would have challenged both characters and readers to reconsider where the line between courage and cowardice truly lies. Bernard was also meant to witness magic as both beautiful and terrifying. In one of Rowling's deleted notes, he stumbles upon a pensieve left in his kitchen. Diggle forgot it while departing in a rush. Out of curiosity, Bernard touches it, plunging into someone else's memory. The scene Rowling drafted was harrowing. Bernard watches a duel between a Laster Moody and a Death Eater in the streets of Berlin, fire and smoke erupting like a war zone. And yet Bernard doesn't scream. He simply watches, then pulls back, shaken but calm. He writes it down. He files it away. He tries to understand. His house, in Rowling's notes, became a waypoint. He won't ask questions, Kingsley Shacklebolt reportedly tells Tonks in one draft, but he remembers everything. The Muggle memory becomes, for a brief time, the safest place in London. Even Dumbledore was to comment on him with quiet respect. Sometimes, the old wizard might have said, we forget that courage is not bred in blood, but in character. The idea also carried a subversive message about wizarding prejudice. Bernard would have exposed a blind spot in the Order, their assumption that non-magical people could not be trusted with responsibility. The Ministry, of course, had always viewed Muggles as an inconvenience. The Statute of Secrecy ensured they remained uninformed, infantilized, helpless. Even Arthur Weasley, for all his affection for Muggle artifacts, still treats them as quaint and amusing, not as equals. Bernard would have broken that illusion. His role was not meant to be grand. He would not fight at the Department of Mysteries. He would not ride a thestral. But he would do something harder. He would persist. In a world full of memory charms and erasures, he would remember. When questioned by ministry officials, he would lie convincingly. When given a chance to profit, he would refuse. They're just people, he might have said. Scared, brave, like the rest of us. In the notes that survive, Rowling hints that Bernard may have once known a witch, a childhood friend or perhaps a sister, who died young in unknown circumstances. This backstory was never developed, but it may explain his calmness. Magic did not startle him, it reminded him. His house, filled with clocks and maps and old books, was a sanctuary long before the Order came knocking. The emotional power of this lost character lies in his ordinariness. He doesn't possess hidden ancestry or secret powers. He doesn't become a hero in headlines, but his actions save lives. His steady hands bandage a wound. His fireplace becomes a flu route. His cat, Edda, sleeps next to a wand holster like it's a sock. These small details ground the story. They make the war real, because while wizards duel and prophecy and vanish, someone still needs to wash the sheets, boil the kettle, and offer a place to rest. One of the final scenes, drafted for Bernard, involved him packing up the belongings of a fallen member of the Order. The name is smudged in the archive copy, possibly Sturgis Podmore, but the tone is somber. Bernard folds the cloak, he touches the broken wand, he places a letter inside the box, and he says nothing. Because what is there to say when the world burns and you are only one man with no wand? Except, I remember. It is telling that Rowling described this character as a spiritual cousin to the enlightened muggles of Fantastic Beasts. But Bernard was never meant to be charming or bumbling. He was meant to be real, the kind of man who wears brown cardigans, forgets his umbrella, and risks his life because it's the right thing to do. And perhaps that's why he was cut. Not because he was unimportant, but because he was too important, too grounded, too capable of overshadowing wizards in their own war. Still, his shadow lingers, in moments when muggles rise above fear, like when Hermione's parents quietly sacrifice their memories, or when Lily Evans, born of muggle stock, faces Voldemort without flinching. We see glimmers of Bernard. He is the whisper in the background, the idea that courage does not come from heritage, but from choice. If he had stayed in the story, readers might have questioned the very foundation of magical secrecy. They might have wondered, what if muggles like Bernard were given a seat at the table? What if bravery was not hidden behind cloaks and spells, but offered in tea and shelter and silence? His house remains unwritten, his story unfinished. But in the quiet corners of Rowling's mind, there once lived a man who didn't need magic to be extraordinary. He needed only a key in the door, a light in the window, and the unshakable will to help. Number 22, Harry becomes a teacher. The idea of Harry Potter returning to Hogwarts as a professor of defense against the dark arts lives in the minds of many fans like a dream half-remembered at dawn. Though J.K. Rowling eventually placed him in the Ministry of Magic, working as an aura to hunt down the remnants of Voldemort's fractured followers, early drafts and whispers from the author's pen suggested another fate, a more poetic one. After the final battle, after the blood on the stone floors of the Great Hall had dried, Harry was meant to step into a quieter, but no less noble role, the teacher who defends the next generation not with spells in the streets, but with lessons in the classroom. Hogwarts had always been more than a school for Harry. It was his first real home, a place where he forged friendships, faced horrors, and discovered the truth about who he was. That the boy, who once trembled at the mention of the Forbidden Forest, would later become its protector, is more than an arc. It's the circle completing itself. When Rowling first conceived this possibility, she touched something deep in the lore of her own world. A child shaped by trauma returns to shield others from experiencing the same. A survivor becomes a guardian. Rowling's musings on Harry's post-war future never made it into the final canon, but she admitted in interviews that she had once considered making him a teacher at Hogwarts, specifically the professor of defense against the dark arts. And what a perfect symmetry it would have been. After all, this was the subject Harry mastered through trial, not textbooks. In his 5th year, he formed Dumbledore's army, not only teaching his peers spells like the Patronus charm, but instilling in them a kind of courage the curriculum never touched. Hermione once said in Order of the Phoenix, "You're the best in the year at defense against the dark arts. Nobody could take you in a duel." She said it with admiration and urgency, desperate for him to believe in himself. That belief became the foundation of their resistance. Under Harry's guidance, students like Neville Longbottom, Luna Lovegood, and Ginny Weasley became soldiers of light. If anyone earned the right to teach that class, it was him. There's a beauty in imagining the once-boy hero walking the stone corridors of Hogwarts not as a student nor as a ghost of war, but as a teacher. In this version of the future, Harry keeps his wand holstered not for combat, but for demonstration. His lessons wouldn't have been dry recitations of magical theory. They would have been laced with real stories, what it means to cast Expelliarmus in a room where someone's life might hang in the balance, how to summon a Patronus, not just with a happy memory, but with something worth fighting for. Rowling's final decision to place Harry in the Ministry came from her own understanding of character and world balance. The curse on the defense against the dark arts post, placed by Voldemort after being denied the job, had finally been lifted following his death. Still, the legacy of that curse remained like an invisible scar. It was tempting to believe that Harry could be the one to bring stability to the position. For 7 years, no teacher had lasted more than a term. If he stepped in, perhaps the cycle would be broken for good. One fan theory elaborated beautifully on this idea. It imagined Harry entering the classroom not with pomp or superiority, but humility. He wouldn't place his name on textbooks. He would hang no trophies in his office. Instead, he would place Lupin's battered briefcase on his desk, the same one with Professor R.J. Lupin etched in peeling letters. In this narrative, Lupin's legacy lives through Harry, who teaches his students not just how to repel dark creatures, but how to live kindly in a dangerous world. The vision even extends to his office. Behind his desk, a shelf filled with relics, not magical, but personal. A photo of Sirius Black mid-laugh, a chocolate frog card of Albus Dumbledore smiling enigmatically, and a small framed note from Lily Potter, a copy of which was found in the rubble of Grimmauld Place. These tokens are not there to glorify his past, but to remind him why he teaches, because every name lost is a lesson not yet taught. Rowling herself has acknowledged that the idea of Harry teaching was romantic. There's a softness in that word, and it fits. For all the battles and duels, Harry's greatest strength was never his power. It was his heart. To place that heart in a classroom would be to let it heal in service of others. It's not hard to imagine the first years whispering nervously about Professor Potter, only to find a kind man who spoke plainly and listened even more. In this alternate future, McGonagall remains headmistress, as Rowling did confirm. She sees in Harry a continuity with Dumbledore, not in eccentricity, but in essence. Just as Dumbledore gave him room to grow, so does she give Harry the space to lead, and he doesn't waste it. Every year he revisits lessons not just on hexes and jinxes, but on fear, resilience, and trust. His Patronus lectures don't just end in a flash of silver light. They end in silence, as he lets the moment sink in, letting students understand that light must be chosen, not conjured. Some students would know who he was, others might know only the stories, but the best ones wouldn't care. They would see a teacher who believes in them. And isn't that what saved Harry in the first place? Belief, Dumbledore's faith, Lupin's patience, Sirius's trust. All these gifts returned now through Harry's hands, passed down in parchment and practice. The fanfiction community has explored this timeline with incredible richness. In one popular story, Harry's first year as professor includes a subplot where he uncovers a secret vault beneath the school containing artifacts from the founders themselves. Another casts him as the reluctant professor who slowly comes to love his role as mentor after a troubled student reminds him of himself. In these stories, Hogwarts becomes not just a castle, but a living memory, breathing through Harry's presence. There's a particular passage in Deathly Hallows where Harry enters the headmaster's office and sees portraits of past leaders of the school. Phineas Nigellus, Armando Dippet, and of course, Dumbledore. One can imagine, years later, a portrait of Harry joining them, not for his fame, but for his service. A man who saved the world once, and then chose to save it again, one lesson at a time. A compelling moment to reflect on is how Rowling handled the redemption arcs of characters like Snape. Snape, the embittered, broken man, used his post at Hogwarts as both penance and protection. In contrast, Harry would have used the same position as a sanctuary, not to hide from pain, but to transform it. The wand that had cast so many spells in war now draws diagrams in the air. The man who faced the Dark Lord now faces awkward questions from curious minds. This shift from battlefield to blackboard would not diminish Harry's legacy, it would elevate it. It would say that peace is not a reward but a responsibility. In this role, Harry wouldn't just teach spells, he would teach stories of how Dobby died free, of how Fred Weasley laughed in the face of death, of how Severus Snape was both villain and hero. These weren't just tales, they were lessons in courage, loyalty, sacrifice. Another fascinating layer is the magical history of the Defense Against the Dark Arts position itself. For decades, it was cursed, rotating through incompetents, imposters, and outright villains. The very fact that Harry survived 7 such teachers and still mastered the subject makes his appointment a kind of justice. It breaks the curse not with counterspells but with legacy. The very boy who suffered under Umbridge, who battled Quirrell, who trusted Lupin, now takes the mantle. Not for glory, but for healing. There's a subtle magic in imagining Neville Longbottom teaching herbology while Harry teaches defense. Two boys once mocked, once uncertain of their worth, now shaping the school that shaped them. In this version of the future, the Golden Trio remain friends, but their paths diverge gently. Hermione reforms the Ministry from within. Ron works alongside George at the joke shop, spreading laughter, and Harry returns to the place where magic first found him, not as a child seeking escape, but as a man offering guidance. It's important to remember that Rowling's final choice, to place Harry in the field as an Auror, was not without merit. She wanted him to remain active, to pursue justice in a world still healing from war. But the road not taken, the vision of Harry Potter as Professor Potter, is no less powerful. It lives in the spaces between words, in the longing of readers who see in Harry not just a hero, but a teacher. The blackboard is dusty, the classroom is filled with murmurs. A new term begins, and there he stands, glasses slightly crooked, wand in hand, not to fight, not to flee, but to teach. And in that moment, perhaps, the war is truly over. Number 23, the Hidden Library of Hogwarts. The Hogwarts Library, as guarded and meticulously maintained by Madame Irma Pince, is a place of knowledge, mystery, and occasional danger. But behind the shelves of well-worn tomes and dust-laden scrolls, behind the whispers of parchment and quiet steps of students searching for answers, there was once imagined a deeper secret. In early drafts of J.K. Rowling's planning notes, long before the polished series reached its final form, there existed a hidden chamber beneath the library, a secret library, open only to those chosen by Hogwarts itself. It was to be a place of forbidden wisdom, arcane magic, and long-lost truths buried for centuries beneath the stone floors where Hermione Granger had so often paced. This secret library was more than just a collection of dangerous texts. It was envisioned as a kind of sentient archive, a vault of memories and magic that required both intelligence and bravery to access. Rowling imagined it protected by enchantments older than the founders themselves, sealed behind riddles and magical contracts that only the worthiest could solve. Unlike the restricted section, which required only a professor's signature and a healthy dose of courage, the secret library demanded recognition from the castle itself. Students could not simply stumble upon it. Hogwarts had to allow them to see it. In one early version of the fourth book's outline, when Rowling was still exploring alternative plot structures, Harry was to discover the secret library late at night during a search for information on strange magical protections he suspected were being used in the Triwizard Tournament. According to notes from Rowling's interviews, he would accidentally trigger a charm hidden in a cracked floor tile near the restricted section, causing the ground beneath him to shift, revealing an ancient spiral staircase leading into the dark. There, torches would light themselves in a cascading ripple, revealing shelves carved into the very stone walls. Inside this imagined space were books bound in dragon hide, scrolls wrapped in human hair, and tomes that murmured to themselves in forgotten tongues. It was here, in this abandoned narrative thread, that Harry was to first encounter fragments of knowledge about Horcruxes. One manuscript, weathered and claw-marked, was said to include a passage that described a wizard splitting his soul through murder, an echo of what Slughorn would later reveal in Half-Blood Prince. The book did not mention Voldemort by name, but the dark implications were unmistakable. Madame Pince in this version would later confess to Dumbledore that she had suspected the existence of the secret library for decades but had never found it. Her obsession with keeping the main library pristine and orderly stemmed, in part, from a fear that something older, wilder, and uncontainable lingered beneath her feet. "The books speak when they think no one listens," she was to say, in a moment of rare candour. This line never made it to print, but it survives in the margins of Rowling's early manuscript drafts, offering a chilling glimpse into what might have been. Had the secret library remained in the final version, it would have fundamentally reshaped the way Hogwarts was perceived, Already a castle layered with riddles and enchanted spaces, the room of requirement, the chamber of secrets, the shifting staircases, it would have given the library an almost mythic weight, transforming it into more than a place for study. It would have been a place where destinies were revealed and darkness tempted the curious. Rowling, however, chose to spread the mystery. She allowed the forbidden forest to remain wild and unknowable, gave the third-floor corridor its Cerberus-guarded trapdoor, and left the room of requirement as the castle's ultimate enigma. A secret library, she concluded, would draw too much narrative gravity toward itself. As she later explained, it would have risked turning the library into the center of the mystery rather than the school itself. Even without the secret library, the books frequently hint at hidden knowledge just beyond the reader's reach. Consider the scene in Philosopher's Stone when Harry uses the invisibility cloak to sneak into the restricted section. The description is haunting. A piercing, blood-curdling scream split the silence. The book Harry had taken off the shelf had screamed. It was screaming. The idea that books themselves could guard their secrets through magical means was a seed of a larger concept that never fully bloomed in the final version, but likely sprouted from the idea of the secret library. Hermione, naturally, would have been the most fitting of all to enter such a place. Her obsession with rules would have clashed with her deeper thirst for knowledge, especially knowledge no one else had. One draft note suggested she was to decode a cipher hidden in the pages of Magical Theory, Volume 6, unlocking a spell that revealed the entrance to the chamber beneath. But in the published series, her quest for knowledge was instead satisfied by tireless hours among mundane volumes, late-night trips to the restricted section, and whispered theories built from pieced-together facts. The very idea of the secret library was built on a principle Rowling explored time and again, that knowledge is both a weapon and a burden. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry, "The truth is a terrible and beautiful thing, and should therefore be treated with great caution." This theme, had the secret library remained, would have been amplified dramatically. What truths lay hidden beneath the library's foundations? What knowledge was deemed too dangerous, even for those like Dumbledore or Flamel? One particularly evocative note in Rowling's draft referred to a mirror bound in chains, located at the far end of the secret library. This mirror, unlike the mirror of Erised, was said to show not the viewer's deepest desire but their most dangerous ambition. It was to serve as a test, a threshold of sorts, for those who sought to remove certain books from the library's custody. If the mirror found your ambition unworthy, the door behind it would remain sealed. This object, too, was cut, but it lingers in the world-building of Rowling's notes like a ghost of a narrative that almost was. Interestingly, the concept of sentient or semi-sentient magical artifacts like the Diary of Tom Riddle may have been born from the same creative well. In the imagined secret library, one of the scrolls was to whisper to Harry in Parseltongue, hinting that its knowledge had been sealed away by Slytherin himself. It would have been one of the early indicators of Harry's connection to that house's founder, a thread that Rowling later chose to weave more subtly through the Sorting Hat's hesitation and Harry's eventual conversations with the Horcrux within him. The fact that the secret library was ultimately abandoned in favor of a more distributed sense of mystery is a testament to Rowling's evolving narrative discipline. She recognized that a single repository of forbidden knowledge risked unbalancing the story. And yet one cannot help but wonder how differently Harry's journey might have unfolded had he descended into that hidden archive during his 4th year. Would he have recognized the significance of what he read? Or would the books have seduced him with half-truths and illusions, as the Hall of Prophecy later would in the Department of Mysteries? Even the Room of Requirement, when it becomes a hiding place for Dumbledore's army, echoes the spirit of the secret library. It contains shelves, cushions, hidden items of forgotten students. In Deathly Hallows, when the trio uses it to search for Ravenclaw's diadem, they discover remnants of magic and memory hidden in the school's very bones. This layering of secrets, small caches of knowledge instead of one grand archive, proved far more effective in pacing and emotional depth. Still, Rowling's abandoned ideas continue to fascinate readers and scholars alike. They are windows into the creative process, alternate realities in which Hogwarts becomes a place of even deeper mysteries. The Secret Library remains a particularly compelling vision, one that mirrors real-world mythologies of hidden wisdom. From the Library of Alexandria to the Vatican archives, the idea that knowledge is sometimes concealed for a reason speaks to something primal in the human experience. The cancellation of the secret library concept did not erase all traces of it. Elements survive in subtext and implication. When Hermione brings books from the restricted section during the search for Horcruxes, the sense of danger and reverence surrounding those tomes hints at a deeper lore. In fact, in the Tales of Beedle the Bard, Rowling includes commentary by Dumbledore himself, who refers to a lost chamber of knowledge beneath the castle. It is not named and no further explanation is given, but for those who know the drafts and understand Rowling's working methods, the reference is unmistakable. In fan circles, the secret library has taken on a life of its own. Writers of fan fiction have placed it beneath the Black Lake, filled it with spirits of long-dead professors, or turned it into a battleground of magical wills where books fight back. Its mythic status is a testament to the strength of Rowling's world-building. Even discarded ideas seem real, tangible, and full of unexplored meaning. Madame Pince herself, who in the published books is mostly a caricature of overprotective sternness, might have become something more, perhaps a secret keeper of the vault, a guardian with hidden knowledge. Her severity could have been reinterpreted not as simple possessiveness, but as fear of what lay below, what might one day rise if the wrong student found the wrong book. There is something timeless in the idea of a hidden library, of a room that holds the power to change the world but chooses only a few to reveal itself to. Perhaps that's why the notion endures. Hogwarts already gave us so many secrets, a diary that breathed, a map that revealed footsteps, a room that obeyed need. But beneath it all, beneath the stone and silence, there might have been something deeper still, a whisper in the dark that only the chosen could hear. Number 24, the story of the Mirror of Erised. The Mirror of Erised, tall and ornate, with clawed feet and a gilded frame, was more than just a magical artifact in The Philosopher's Stone. It was a silent witness to Harry Potter's first taste of longing, for family, for connection, for a life that might have been. Set in a forgotten classroom, shrouded in darkness and dust, the mirror was like a hidden relic of an ancient world. And yet beneath its silent surface, it pulsed with meaning. For readers, it was unforgettable. For Harry, it was a doorway into the deepest chamber of his heart. But what if this mysterious object wasn't meant to disappear after the first book? What if it held more secrets, more layers, more truths yet to be uncovered? In early drafts of J.K. Rowling's notes, there were plans to reintroduce the Mirror of Erised in later volumes, particularly in The Order of the Phoenix and The Half-Blood Prince. It might have returned not just as a memory, but as a character in itself, a mirror that evolves with the hearts of those who dare look into it. Rowling considered revisiting the mirror to show how Harry's desires had shifted from personal longing to collective responsibility. In The Philosopher's Stone, Harry saw his parents. In The Order of the Phoenix, he might have seen Sirius alive, standing beside him like a guardian against the darkness. By The Half-Blood Prince, the mirror could have reflected Voldemort's destruction, or even a quiet, simple life free from war. There was narrative potential in seeing the mirror, not just as a one-time symbol, but as a growing shadow that moved with Harry's own transformation. When Dumbledore told Harry the happiest man on earth would look into the mirror and see only himself exactly as he is, it became more than a lesson. It was a prophecy. Harry was not that man in his first year. But by the time he walked to his own death in the Forbidden Forest, ready to sacrifice everything, could he have become that man? The reappearance of the mirror could have shown us the proof. Rowling's early drafts contained hints of a deeper history behind the mirror of Erised, an ancient origin that might have tied it to the very foundations of Hogwarts. There was a notion that it once belonged to one of the four founders, possibly Rowena Ravenclaw or Godric Gryffindor. Its frame was inscribed with Erised stra ehru, oit ube, kafru oit on wosi, which, when read backwards, reveals its truth. I show not your face, but your heart's desire. The mirror's magic was old magic, deeper than enchantments taught in defense against the dark arts. Some early ideas speculated that it held a key to unlocking a hidden chamber or vault containing an unknown artifact from the Founder's era. This ancient thread would have turned the mirror into more than just a symbolic device. It would have made it an artifact on par with the sword of Gryffindor or the diadem of Ravenclaw, an object imbued with centuries of forgotten power. In one discarded storyline, the mirror hid a riddle within its reflection, legible only during a lunar eclipse, leading to a hidden relic connected to the original founders. However, when the storyline of Horcruxes came to the forefront, this idea was gently pushed aside. The mirror's secrets, its founder's lineage, and its riddles were sacrificed for the greater arc of Voldemort's fractured soul. Still, the symbolic power of the mirror persisted, haunting the reader's memory. When Harry used the Resurrection Stone in the Deathly Hallows to summon the shadows of his parents, Sirius and Lupin, the scene echoed his nights in front of the mirror in his first year. It was not just a return to grief, it was a transformation of it. He no longer clung to illusions, he understood their place in his heart. The difference was staggering. As a boy, he would have given anything to step into the mirror. As a man, he walked away from it, even if only metaphorically. The mirror could have also been a profound tool for other characters. Imagine Severus Snape, alone after Lily's death, looking into the mirror. What would he have seen? Not just Lily, he would have seen a version of himself forgiven, loved, and redeemed. His life, built around regret and sacrifice, mirrored Harry's own, though on a darker path. The Mirror of Erised would have been the perfect artifact to reveal Snape's humanity long before his final revelations. Likewise, consider Draco Malfoy. At the height of his internal conflict in The Half-Blood Prince, what would the mirror have shown him? Would it have reflected power, prestige, the respect of his father? Or would it have betrayed his guilt and fear, showing his family safe, far away from Voldemort's war? The mirror was capable of slicing through pride and posturing, revealing the frightened child beneath the polished mask. Its potential as a storytelling device for character introspection was limitless. Even Dumbledore himself confessed, "I sometimes see myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks." But years later, in The Deathly Hallows, Harry learns the deeper truth. Dumbledore's real desire was to see his family whole again, to erase the guilt of his sister, Ariana's death. This delayed confession revealed how even the wisest could lie to themselves. Had the mirror returned in The Order of the Phoenix during Dumbledore's long silences and avoidance of Harry, it could have mirrored Dumbledore's internal struggle, his failure to act, his fear of power. The truth was not in words, it was always in the mirror. From a literary standpoint, the mirror's singular appearance in the first book serves as a powerful metaphor for childhood. In that scene, Harry is still dreaming. He sees the family he never knew, their faces etched with warmth and pride. It's one of the most emotionally charged scenes in the entire series. The stillness, the silence, the aching hope, it all comes together as Harry returns, night after night, unable to resist. He was looking at his family for the first time in his life, Rowling writes. The moment is pure, untouched by the darkness that later shadows the series. But Rowling's own reflections on this mirror grew more complex as the series matured. In interviews, she acknowledged that she had considered using the mirror again, but that the themes it embodied, loss, yearning, illusion, had been taken over by more urgent, more dramatic devices. The pensieve, for example, became the primary magical means of exploring memory and truth. The Horcruxes became the instruments of obsession and destruction. The Resurrection Stone allowed brief reunion, each in some way filled the void the mirror had once occupied. And yet something remained uniquely intimate about the mirror of Erised. The pensieve revealed memories, truths of the past. The mirror revealed desires, truths of the soul. One shows what was, the other shows what could never be. That difference is profound. It is why the mirror still lingers in the reader's imagination long after other magical objects have faded. It whispered to children who had lost someone. It whispered to adults who had regrets. There is a quiet tragedy in the fact that the mirror is never mentioned again after the first book. We never learn what became of it. Was it destroyed, hidden away, guarded, forgotten? In an early note, Rowling had considered giving it a place in the Room of Requirement, accessible only when someone's longing was strong enough to summon it. Perhaps in that vast chamber of shifting walls and hidden doors, the mirror still waits cloaked in shadow, ready to show yet another truth. In fan theories and unofficial lore, the mirror has become almost mythic. Some believe it was crafted by the same enchanters who built the foundations of Hogwarts. Others suggest it was once used to test the true intentions of those who wished to become professors at the school. A few speculate that it can change depending on the viewer's emotional state, that it shows not the truest desire, but the strongest. Rowling never confirmed these possibilities, but the very existence of such theories shows how deeply the mirror imprinted itself in the minds of readers. Had it returned in the Order of the Phoenix, it might have stood as a mirror to Harry's trauma. In that year, he was filled with anger, confusion, and grief. He was haunted by Cedric's death and Dumbledore's distance. The mirror might have shown Cedric alive, Voldemort gone, Sirius free. Or it might have shown Harry himself at peace, surrounded by friends who believed him, an image that could shatter the boy who felt most alone. It would have been a mirror not of comfort, but of torment. In The Half-Blood Prince, it might have become a mirror of contrast. As Dumbledore led Harry through memories of Voldemort's past, the mirror could have been placed in parallel, showing what Tom Riddle might have once desired: a family, belonging, love. That boy in the orphanage had desires too. Had he looked into the mirror as a child, perhaps he would have seen something achingly human. The tragedy of Voldemort is that he outgrew even that. He no longer desired love, only immortality. Ultimately, the mirror of Erised became a symbol of a quieter magic, one that did not require spells or incantations, but courage. The courage to look within, to face what one truly wants, and to ask, is this desire worthy? Is it real? Is it dangerous? Dumbledore warned, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. But he also placed the Philosopher's Stone in the mirror, hiding it from those who would use it out of greed. The mirror, then, was also a test, a moral gatekeeper, judging the heart of those who approached it. That dual nature, the mirror as both sanctuary and trial, is what gives it its enduring power. It asks a question that grows darker as we age. What do you want most? And is it something that can be reached or something that must be let go? For Harry, the answer changed. For readers, it lingers still. Number 25, betrayal. Within the Order of the Phoenix, betrayal within the Order of the Phoenix. An idea so chilling, so intimate in its horror, that J.K. Rowling herself considered and then discarded it. Her world, already steeped in death, fear, and deception, flirted with the possibility of rot at its very heart. While the series gives us unforgettable traitors like Peter Pettigrew, who sold out his closest friends to Voldemort, the idea of a mole among the resistance itself, someone Harry trusted, someone who sat at the same table in Grimmauld Place, could have unravelled the entire emotional fabric of the narrative. Yet Rowling toyed with this notion, and in early drafts the shadows fell not on Snape or Pettigrew, but on names less obvious, Hestia Jones and Kingsley Shacklebolt. Kingsley, the calm, deep-voiced aura who infiltrated the ministry and later became the very symbol of moral order. And Hestia, one of the quieter members, but present, diligent, faithful. These two were among those Rowling considered for a darker path. It wasn't enough to assume loyalty just because they stood against Voldemort. In war, the lines blur, and Rowling knew it. Her early outlines explored what might happen if that blur stretched inside the Order, if the very idea of good could no longer be trusted. Hestia Jones was always something of a peripheral figure in the canon, introduced in Order of the Phoenix as part of the group who escorts Harry from Privet Drive to Grimmauld Place. She was described as a pink-cheeked woman with short hair, and despite her limited appearances, Rowling had given her more weight behind the scenes. In the margins of drafts, there are suggestions she might be nervous, not because of fear, but because of guilt. Imagine that, Hestia, always slightly anxious, possibly covering more than just wartime nerves. Could her moments of unease have been read differently? Likewise, Kingsley Shacklebolt, the suave and capable Auror, was Rowling's more radical choice for betrayal. His position within the ministry, his access to classified information, and his growing closeness to Dumbledore's inner circle made him an ideal candidate, if not for heroism, then for espionage. In Rowling's notes, it's indicated that Kingsley might have passed information to both sides under the pretense of higher strategy. In this vision, Kingsley wasn't evil. He was pragmatic, perhaps dangerously so, someone who could justify any act for the sake of ending the war. It's chilling to imagine how a betrayal by Kingsley would have unfolded. As he was responsible for directing the search for Sirius Black during Order of the Phoenix, while simultaneously leaking misinformation to protect the fugitive, he operated within a moral grey zone already. The line between protecting and manipulating was razor thin. Had Rowling chosen to twist that further, Kingsley's dual allegiance might have resulted in deadly consequences, perhaps even the exposure of Grimmauld Place itself. Indeed, Sirius Black's death becomes even more tragic in this hypothetical timeline. What if the location of the battle at the Department of Mysteries had been subtly influenced by misinformation from within the Order? What if the entire rescue attempt had been orchestrated to trap the children and kill Sirius? Rowling never implemented this storyline, but her notes show the seeds of it. A betrayal that orchestrates not only loss, but the illusion of valiant failure. It would have broken Harry more than any physical injury. Rowling herself said in an interview that she wanted readers to feel tension, but not despair. That was her boundary. Betrayal within the Order, she feared, would have made the war feel unwinnable. After all, Dumbledore's army was built on trust. The Order was a haven not just from Death Eaters, but from the moral decay of the larger wizarding world. If that sanctum fell, what remained? Still, the temptation of such a storyline lingered. Peter Pettigrew's arc had already shown how even Gryffindors could fall. And Barty Crouch Jr., posing as Mad-Eye Moody in Goblet of Fire, revealed the terrifying success of infiltration. The idea that the enemy could wear the face of a friend was not new to the series, but Rowling's restraint lay in targeting the emotional safe zones. The betrayal of Pettigrew hurt James and Lily's legacy. A betrayal within the Order would have shattered Harry's present. Imagine the psychological devastation had Kingsley been unmasked during Deathly Hallows. In those pages he becomes the voice of reason on the wireless program Potterwatch, a beacon of hope to hidden listeners. His voice becomes a symbol of resistance. But had he been a Death Eater's agent all along, the betrayal would not have been strategic. It would have been spiritual, a knife through the very concept of truth. Let's examine a specific scene when Kingsley warns the Order about Pius Thicknessil being under the Imperious Curse, a key piece of intel that helps protect the Resistance. What if, in the alternate draft, this had been a calculated lie? What if Thickness was never cursed, but willingly loyal to Voldemort, and Kingsley was using the curse as a cover story to mask the infiltration of the Ministry from within? The layers of deception deepen, and trust becomes a weapon. Hestia's role would have been quieter, but no less deadly. In one outline Rowling abandoned, she was the one who let slip to the Ministry about the wedding of Bill and Fleur, a moment that led to the collapse of the borough's safe haven. In this version, Hestia's betrayal was not flashy but insidious. A single whispered comment at the wrong time, a letter read by the wrong eyes. She was never a murderer. She was just careless, or perhaps expertly careless. And yet Rowling walked away from this storyline, perhaps because she felt it would overshadow the central theme of Deathly Hallows, that love and loyalty, even in the darkest moments, were stronger than fear and doubt. Still, she left breadcrumbs of ambiguity. Even within the final published work, paranoia infects the Order. Harry himself suspects Lupin at one point, and during the infiltration of the Ministry, the trio constantly worries about betrayal. The theme of broken trust was preserved, but always just outside the Order's core. Think of Mundungus Fletcher, technically a member, yet always unreliable. He stole Black family heirlooms, sold information, and fled in key moments, but he was never a mastermind. Rowling allowed betrayal to exist, but only on the periphery, never at the heart. In this way, Rowling upheld the ideal that the Resistance, no matter how battered, still had a moral compass, that those who chose to fight Voldemort did so not only for survival, but for integrity, that the Order of the Phoenix, despite its losses, was not poisoned from within. Still, the possibility lingers. Had Rowling allowed Hestia or Kingsley to fall, the repercussions would have been immense. We might have lost not only key allies but entire plotlines. Tonks's arc, which relies on her trust in the Order, might have taken a darker turn. Her relationship with Lupin, her pregnancy, her final stand at Hogwarts, each could have been undermined by paranoia and fear. Likewise, the final battle at Hogwarts might have been entirely reshaped. If Kingsley had switched sides, the strategic defense of the castle could have collapsed, spells miscast, allies misled, the bridge not destroyed in time, children left vulnerable. Rowling's battlefield would have turned from epic to massacre. And what of Harry? His journey through betrayal had already been cruel. Snape's loyalty was only understood after death. Dumbledore's secrets unravelled only after the grave. Adding betrayal within the living circle of the Order might have turned Harry into something colder, more vengeful, perhaps even more like Voldemort. The author understood that even fictional characters can only endure so much. Hope must not be extinguished entirely, or the reader turns away. And so Hestia remained a footnote, Kingsley rose to Minister of Magic, and the Order, battered though it was, remained morally intact. In the end, Rowling's restraint may have preserved the soul of her story. But the shadow of that alternate path haunts the pages still. What might have been had the enemy worn the face of a friend. Number 26. A spell that erases magical abilities. There is something far more terrifying than death in the world of magic, something so unnatural that even the darkest wizards hesitate to speak of it. Among the many discarded ideas, J.K. Rowling considered while building the Harry Potter universe, there was one that stood out for its eerie implications. A spell designed to strip a wizard or witch of their magic forever. Not to kill, not to wound, not to control, but to erase the essence of what made them magical. This spell, according to early drafts and interviews, was contemplated as a weapon of last resort, a chilling tool in the hands of those willing to destroy not the body, but the soul's gift. This spell had no name in the published books, but in Rowling's conceptual notes it hovered like a ghost, unwritten, unnamed, but deeply unsettling. The idea surfaced during the planning of the final books, when Voldemort's power and cruelty needed to escalate to unbearable heights. What greater threat could he pose to Harry than not just killing him, but taking away his very being as a wizard? To Voldemort, who equated power with magic, to be stripped of one's magical ability would be a fate worse than death. In this context, the spell was imagined not as a punishment or curse, but as an irreversible act of annihilation. Imagine the horror. A wizard raised in the traditions of magic, whose identity, family, and future depend upon his magical gift, suddenly feeling the loss of that gift as if a vital limb had been torn away. Wands refusing to respond, spells slipping into silence, the magical world becoming distant and unreachable. In a universe where magic is not learned but inherent, this would be a brutal mutilation of the self. And that is precisely why Rowling ultimately decided not to include such a spell. It defied the moral architecture of her world. Magic in the Harry Potter universe is not merely a tool, it is a reflection of the soul. To remove it would be to erase the soul's signature. Still, the spell lingered in the shadows of the narrative. In early drafts of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Voldemort considered using it on Harry, not out of mercy or pragmatism, but as an act of dominance. He would not merely kill the boy who lived, he would unmake him. Harry would survive, but as a muggle, cast out of the very world he had come to love, a silent witness to the triumph of darkness. It was a plan too vile even for Voldemort in the final version. Rowling feared it would cross a line that could not be uncrossed. This spell, had it been written into the lore, would have required immense magical power, likely surpassing that of the unforgivable curses. Perhaps it would not be cast with a wand at all. Perhaps it would require blood, or sacrifice, or the destruction of ancient relics. A magic that pierces the soul cannot be light. Dumbledore himself believed in the sacredness of a wizard's gift. In the Order of the Phoenix, he says, you are protected, in short, by your ability to love. What would a spell that removes magic do to a person's capacity to love, to hope, to be? One can imagine the temptation this spell would offer to those in power. If a single incantation could silence a rebellion or nullify a bloodline, what tyrant would resist it? The Ministry of Magic, in its darkest hours, might have viewed it as an expedient solution to threats they could not contain. Grindelwald, in his pursuit of magical supremacy, might have considered it a punishment for those he deemed unworthy. But magic, Rowling reminds us, is not the enemy, abuse of power is. The spell would have been the ultimate abuse. The story of Ariana Dumbledore gives us a chilling parallel. Ariana, as described by her brother Aberforth, lost control of her magic after a traumatic assault by muggle boys. It destroyed her, what they did, he says, in Deathly Hallows. Ariana didn't lose her magic, but it became wild, volatile, painful. She became trapped between worlds. No longer a child, not quite a witch, her magic a burden rather than a blessing. Imagine if someone had taken it from her completely. Would she have survived it? That is the heart of Rowling's fear, that to erase someone's magic would be to erase their identity. In her world, magic is not a skill but a birthright. It lives in blood and bone. Even squibs, born to magical parents but lacking power, suffer from the pain of exclusion. Argus Filch, the caretaker at Hogwarts, is a bitter, lonely man who keeps a pamphlet titled Quickspell, a correspondence course in beginner's magic. It is a pathetic glimpse into a lifelong yearning. Now imagine that yearning imposed upon someone who once had magic. The psychological damage would be incalculable. Some spells in the series already approach this boundary. The Obliviate charm, when used with precision, can erase memories permanently. Gilderoy Lockhart, after his backfired spell in Chamber of Secrets, loses not just his memories, but his sense of self. He becomes a shell, wandering St. Mungo's, cheerful but lost. Yet even this is reversible in theory. The spell that erases magic would be final, a one-way door, the magical equivalent of a lobotomy. Rowling herself admitted that the idea felt too extreme, even for a world that included soul-splitting and child murder. Voldemort could commit atrocities, but he could not destroy the fundamental nature of a person. That would turn the wizarding world into a place too cruel to bear. The balance of power in her universe depends on the belief that magic is both gift and responsibility, and not a switch to be turned on or off. But let us entertain the possibility that such a spell existed in the shadows, hidden in the oldest grimoires, bound in dragon hide and sealed with blood. Perhaps it was once used during the Goblin rebellions, when wizards feared being overrun by non-human magical beings. Perhaps a dark wizard, now forgotten, once wielded it against a rival school of magic. It would be spoken of in hushed tones, a myth to frighten apprentices, a secret so dark that even the unspeakables of the Department of Mysteries refused to study it. And yet magic has always been susceptible to corruption. It is not the spell that is evil, but the hand that wields it. Dumbledore warns Harry in The Half-Blood Prince, "It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." But there are fates worse than death, and a life without magic for someone born to it is a kind of waking death. This is the truth that Rowling touched upon and wisely recoiled from. In Voldemort's hands, this spell would have been a tool of terror, wielded not out of necessity but as an expression of his belief that only the strong deserve power. In his twisted philosophy, to take away magic would be to purge weakness. But Harry's strength lay not in his spells, but in his heart. "I'm not interested in what happened between you and your parents," Harry once said to Voldemort. "I'm not interested in your delusions of grandeur." Even if Voldemort had cast the spell, he would not have broken Harry. There is, of course, a poetic irony in the idea. Voldemort himself was born with immense magical power, yet his obsession with domination rendered him less than human. He created Horcruxes to evade death, but in doing so he lost parts of his soul. Had he been struck with the spell to remove magic, perhaps it would have been a mercy. For a creature so warped, stripped of power, might finally remember what it means to be a man. And what if Harry had the spell been cast? Would he have returned to the Muggle world, to Privet Drive, a forgotten boy with a scar and a past no one believed? Would he have mourned the loss, or would he have found new meaning in a life beyond magic? Rowling feared that writing this path would betray the emotional truth of her story. Harry's victory lies not in escaping pain, but in embracing who he is. To take away his magic would be to unwrite that triumph. Perhaps the idea still echoes in the forbidden section of the Hogwarts library, in a book no one dares open. A curse whispered by those who have lost everything. A spell with no incantation, no counter-curse, and no mercy. It is fitting that Rowling buried it. Some magic, after all, is too dark even for fiction. But its shadow remains, in the longing of squibs, in the tragedy of Ariana, in the silence of the Department of Mysteries, and in the unspoken fear that in the wrong hands magic is not a gift but a weapon of annihilation. Number 28. A magical illness sweeps through Hogwarts. Of all the stories that could have been told within the hallowed walls of Hogwarts, few are as haunting and as mysterious as the one that never made it to the final pages of the Harry Potter series. In her early drafts for Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, J.K. Rowling entertained an idea that would have plunged the magical school into a state of magical crisis unlike any it had known before. A magical epidemic, sudden, unpredictable, and terrifying, was to sweep through Hogwarts, affecting students in bizarre and alarming ways, though ultimately discarded, the concept left behind a ghost of what could have been, a tale of vulnerability, fear, and the unpredictable nature of magic when it spins out of control. The origin of the illness was meant to be a mistake, one born in the belly of the castle itself, the potions classroom. Rowling envisioned an experiment gone awry, perhaps under the supervision of Professor Horace Slughorn, the affable yet often careless potions master who had returned to Hogwarts at Dumbledore's request. Slughorn, despite his brilliance, was known for indulgence and a certain blindness to danger when prestige or opportunity presented itself. It was in one of his more advanced lessons, deep within the dungeons, that a student, likely a gifted yet reckless Slytherin, would have combined two rare ingredients without realizing the result. Rowling reportedly toyed with the idea that the experiment involved fluxweed and powdered mooncalf liver, both potent magical components. On their own, they were relatively safe, but together, under the wrong phase of the moon, they could produce a vapor capable of altering the magical balance within a person. A single drop spilled on a warm surface, inhaled by unsuspecting classmates, would have been enough to spread the affliction. Within hours, symptoms would emerge, strange glowing rashes, involuntary transformations into animals, and even the complete inability to perform magic. Hogwarts, known as the most secure location in the wizarding world, was to become a place of quarantine. Students were confined to their common rooms, and meals were delivered by house elves wearing makeshift protective charms. The castle, usually buzzing with energy and mischief, turned sombre and quiet. Portraits whispered in worry, and ghosts lingered silently, avoiding their usual games. Even Peeves, the poltergeist known for his chaotic sense of humour, toned down his pranks out of what some suspected was genuine fear. Neville Longbottom, who had only just begun to show real talent in herbology and defence against the dark arts, would have been among the first to fall ill. For 3 days he reportedly transformed into a badger every time he sneezed, unable to control his body. It was like having your insides decide they preferred another shape, Rowling once noted in an interview about the idea. The transformation wasn't painful, but the mental toll was severe. Neville, already struggling with confidence, began to withdraw. The story would have used his suffering to explore the theme of internal strength, even when magic fails. Hermione Granger, ever the scholar, threw herself into researching the illness. With the library placed under magical restrictions, she turned to obscure texts in the restricted section, books with spines that twitched and pages that whispered. It was there she discovered a reference to a 12th century plague called the worm blight, a magical sickness that had once struck a wizarding monastery in the Pyrenees. The symptoms were similar: erratic spellcasting, magical surges, and eventual loss of wand connection. The monks had burned their wands and lived out their lives in silence. Hermione, unwilling to accept such a fate, swore she'd find a better cure. Even Draco Malfoy, whose arc in Half-Blood Prince centered on his mission from Voldemort, was affected in these early drafts. The illness, ironically, gave him a reprieve from the crushing pressure he felt. According to Rowling's notes, he spent a week locked in the hospital wing, unable to speak without his voice turning into bird calls. Though it was a temporary and laughable affliction, it was enough to delay his attempts to repair the vanishing cabinet. This detour in his storyline would have added depth to his inner conflict, caught between fear, expectation, and a literal inability to fulfill his task. Rowling considered that the infection might have been magical in origin, but triggered by a cursed object brought unknowingly into the school. A student, possibly Luna Lovegood, ever the curious and trusting soul, might have discovered an ancient artifact during the summer holidays and, seeing no danger, brought it with her. The object, a small silver pendant with runes carved in a language older than Latin, pulsed with a dull green light. Unknown to Luna, it had been buried for centuries under a collapsed wizard's tomb near Tintagel, and the enchantment placed upon it was meant to protect a powerful relic from theft by causing disorientation and instability in any magical being nearby. As more students fell ill, the staff struggled to maintain order. Professor McGonagall was placed in charge of the response team. Always calm in crisis, she instituted a rotation system for staff to watch over the students and personally checked every corner of the castle for possible sources of contagion. Filch, the caretaker, found this new threat oddly invigorating and took to patrolling the halls with a mop doused in vinegar, insisting it burned the magic clean. Meanwhile, Dumbledore worked behind the scenes, corresponding with St. Mungo's and old colleagues across Europe. What made the epidemic especially dangerous was the unpredictability of the symptoms. One student, Seamus Finnegan, temporarily lost his shadow. Another, Parvati Patil, was unable to speak anything but gobbledygook, the language of goblins, for an entire fortnight. Spells cast during this period often misfired. A simple lumos might explode in a burst of flowers, while Accio could summon objects from other countries. The magical field of the entire school seemed warped, and the students began to fear that Hogwarts itself was sick. In one of the more dramatic moments of Rowling's outline, Ron Weasley collapsed during a Quidditch practice and levitated 12 feet into the air, unconscious, spinning slowly like a marionette. Madame Pomfrey had to anchor him to the ground with enchanted ropes. It was an unnerving moment that underscored just how little anyone understood about the illness. The hospital wing overflowed with patients, and beds were placed in the great hall under floating candles, each surrounded by a faint, shimmering barrier. The idea behind the epidemic was not merely to add chaos, but to explore how magic, often taken for granted, could betray its users. Hogwarts had always been portrayed as a fortress, a bastion against external threats like Death Eaters or Dementors. But what if the danger came from within? What if the very magic meant to protect them was turned against them? The illness would have served as a metaphor for a world on the brink, where even the safest places were no longer immune. In her notes, Rowling mused that the epidemic might have been a defense mechanism, a forgotten enchantment linked to the founding of the school, accidentally triggered by the presence of the cursed artifact. There was speculation that Salazar Slytherin had devised the enchantment as a final failsafe should his Chamber of Secrets be discovered and violated. If true, it would have made the illness not a random accident, but a buried echo of Hogwarts' darkest roots. Despite the gravity of the situation, Rowling had also planned moments of levity. Fred and George Weasley were to return briefly with shipments of skiving sickness sweets, claiming they could reverse the symptoms with their newest invention, the Unflux pill. The twins used the opportunity to test new products on their fellow students, some of which worked, while others turned recipients purple or made them temporarily transparent. Even in crisis, their humor was meant to provide relief and emphasize the importance of laughter during times of fear. The story arc would have culminated in a dangerous expedition beneath the castle. Hermione, Harry, and Ginny would descend into the old catacombs, searching for the source of the sickness. Guided by cryptic notes found in the library's oldest texts, they'd uncover a sealed chamber beneath the foundations of the castle, untouched for centuries. There, nestled among roots and bones, lay the true source, an obsidian tablet inscribed with pulsating runes, placed there as a ward against dark magic. It had cracked when Luna's pendant was brought into proximity, allowing the chaos to seep out. With a combination of ancient counterspells and raw instinct, Hermione and Harry would have sealed the magic again, but not without cost. Harry's wand would be damaged in the process, and Ginny would bear a scar on her wrist that glowed faintly when near cursed objects. It would be a moment of bonding and quiet trauma for characters already burdened by the looming war. Rowling ultimately abandoned the storyline. She believed it would distract from the central theme of the sixth book, Voldemort's past, the brewing war, and the journey toward Dumbledore's death. As she noted in interviews, "It was an idea I loved, but it pulled attention from the real enemy. Illness is frightening, yes, but Voldemort was the disease I needed them all to fight." Still, the abandoned arc leaves a ghostly trace in the narrative. One might see hints of it in the mood of Half-Blood Prince, in the nervous tension, in the quiet dread that seems to hang in the air. And though readers never saw the magical epidemic unfold, the idea remains one of the most fascinating what-ifs in the wizarding world, a reminder that even in the most enchanted of places, danger can take forms more subtle and more terrifying than anyone expects. Number 29. The final duel between Harry and Voldemort in Godric's Hollow. In an early version of the Deathly Hallows manuscript, there existed a vision so striking that it nearly altered the emotional landscape of the entire saga. J.K. Rowling, in her creative process, once imagined the final confrontation between Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort taking place not within the towering walls of Hogwarts, but on a fog-drenched field in Godric's Hollow. A place of memory, a graveyard of dreams, a shattered home where love once stood defiant against death. It would have been a finale wrapped in the silence of ghosts rather than the cries of battle. And while Rowling ultimately chose the castle, her own storytelling sanctuary, the Godric's Hollow version remains an eerie echo of what might have been. The envisioned scene was steeped in raw symbolism. Imagine the darkened sky casting its shroud over the skeletal remains of the Potter home, its ruined walls whispering of betrayal and bravery. mist creeping over the grass like forgotten spells, with only the sharp breath of two enemies breaking the stillness. Harry, now 17 and carrying the weight of both fate and legacy, would stand just feet from the place where his parents had been murdered. It would be here, among the ash and the sorrow, that he would choose to face Voldemort alone and unarmed by the protection of allies or stone walls. A boy turned man, facing the thing that killed his family. The dramatic resonance of such a scene cannot be overstated. Godric's Hollow was where Harry's story truly began, the place where prophecy was set in motion and innocence was shattered. The site held a memory both sacred and violent, a paradox that had haunted him throughout the series. To have ended the final chapter, there would have been poetic, even tragic, a circle closed not with triumph, but with quiet confrontation. It would have turned the battle into a solemn reckoning rather than a spectacle of war. The house, still damaged and untouched by time, was a silent witness. It had seen James Potter fall without a wand in hand. It had watched Lily Potter plead for her son's life before surrendering her own. And now it would have seen Harry return, not as the helpless child in a crib, but as the very weapon Voldemort had unknowingly forged. The house, with its scorched walls and gaping windows, would have been the most honest battlefield. A home desecrated by evil, turned into the stage for its undoing. Rowling's depiction of Godric's Hollow in the Deathly Hallows is brief, but heavy with atmosphere. The little house seemed to have been left untouched for decades, she writes, as if the attack had happened only yesterday. The war-scarred building was more than a ruin. It was a monument to a mother's sacrifice, a father's final stand, and a child's survival. To bring Voldemort here, to the heart of Harry's loss, would have been a final act of reclamation. Magic is power, but memory is a weapon too. And in that field, memory would have done most of the fighting. There is a strange, almost theatrical beauty in imagining Voldemort stepping onto that field, his pale skin catching the mist, the ruins behind Harry looming like jagged teeth. Without an audience of Death Eaters or Defenders, the duel would strip away grandeur and reveal something primal. Fear, regret, pride, defiance. A man obsessed with immortality would face a boy who had already died once and returned. There would be no applause, only silence, heavy and absolute. In this alternate vision, Harry would not be surrounded by the protective embrace of his friends. Ron and Hermione would not be steps away, no teachers, no order, no students gathered in the great hall, trembling and praying, just Harry and Voldemort. And the ghosts, the memories of James and Lily, of Dumbledore, of Sirius, all watching from within Harry's heart. It would be a solitary kind of courage, different from the unity of Hogwarts. And it would force Voldemort to reckon with the truth, that for all his power, he was always alone. The symbolism would be staggering. Godric's Hollow was named for one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, Godric Gryffindor, the champion of bravery. It was fitting that Harry, the quintessential Gryffindor, would choose this as his final battleground. It was the place where love had once been the greatest magic. And Voldemort, born in a cold orphanage and devoid of love, would stand on that ground like a shadow that did not belong. It would be a battle of philosophies as much as wands. Love versus fear, sacrifice versus domination, memory versus oblivion. And then there is the graveyard, just a stone's throw from the Potter house. Beneath the frost-bitten grass lie the graves of Lily and James. Their epitaph reads, "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death." Harry, who has walked willingly into death and returned, would embody that inscription. Voldemort, who has fled from death for decades, would be forced to meet it. Right there, with the graves in sight, the meaning would pierce sharper than any curse. "There's nothing worse than death," Voldemort had once sneered. But he was wrong. Living without love, without hope, that was worse. Harry knew it, and now, in the shadow of his parents' tomb, Voldemort would learn it. This ending would have made Harry's journey deeply introspective. It would not be a war won by numbers or strategy, but but by understanding. Harry's triumph would be spiritual. He would stand not with the Elder Wand, but with humility, with the acceptance of death. "Does it hurt?" he had asked his mother when facing death in the forest. And she had answered, "Dying? Not at all." In Godric's Hollow, Harry would face death again. Not his own this time, but the death of a legacy of fear. It would have been the ultimate act of reclaiming space. The house where Harry was almost murdered would become the place where he overcame evil. The floorboards that once echoed with screams would now echo with victory. Not the kind measured by applause or celebration, but by quiet finality. The circle would close, the place of ending would become the place of triumph. Yet Rowling chose Hogwarts, the castle of dreams, the place of learning, of friendship, of every first. Her choice was grounded in deep emotional logic. Hogwarts was not just a location, and it was home. It was the place where Harry had built a family, where battles had been fought and friendships tested. It was the beating heart of the story. To stage the final duel there made narrative sense. The war began and ended in the same sacred place. Still, the Godric's Hollow version remains haunting. One can almost see it, the flicker of wandlight through fog, the jagged silhouette of a ruined home, the final words whispered not in triumph but in release, the words that sealed the fate of one and freed the soul of the other. In this vision, Voldemort's body would fall silently to the ground, not in the echoing Great Hall, but beneath a grey sky that had once wept for the Potters. It would have been more intimate, more haunting, more final. The landscape itself would have remembered. Every tree, every stone, every blade of grass would have carried the memory of what had happened and what was being undone. The quiet death of a tyrant in the place he thought he had conquered forever. Harry, in this ending, would not raise his wand in triumph. He would simply turn, perhaps glance once at the house, and walk away. There would be no roar of victory, only the hush of peace settling over a scarred land. The mist would swallow him as he disappeared down the road. A boy who came full circle. A life taken and returned. Neville Longbottom wouldn't have slain Nagini in front of a crowd. That moment of bravery would be missed. Molly Weasley's iconic duel with Bellatrix Lestrange, "Not my daughter, you bitch," would never have echoed through the halls. The castle would not shake with rebellion. But in their place there would be something else, something lonelier, something more ancient and personal. The ending would not be about spectacle, it would be about memory. Even the Horcrux destruction would take on a different tone. Instead of chaos, there would be deliberation. Instead of battle cries, whispers. The war would have felt more like a requiem than a revolution, a closing of wounds rather than an explosion of might. It would have asked the reader to look inward, to confront the cost of grief, not just the glory of triumph. In Hogwarts, the victory feels earned, collective, celebrated. In Godric's Hollow, it would have felt sacred, a quiet end to a loud evil, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories happen without witnesses, just two figures, once boy and once man, now soldier and ghost, meeting where it all began, and ending what should have never begun.